like on YouTube?
Yeah.
You should be watching it. Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Mayor, we're ready. Thank you for bearing with us a little bit.
Okay. This is Brad Fingeldine, Mayor Fingeldine. We welcome you all to the January 19th, 2021 City Commission meeting. Before we get going, we'll ask Porter O'Neill, our Communications and Creative Resources Director, to give us some guidance on this meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. As Mayor Finkeldine said, my name is Porter O'Neill, and I'll be facilitating the Zoom video portion of the meeting tonight. I'm here with Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk, and she'll work alongside Mayor Finkeldine to help facilitate the meeting. This meeting is being broadcast and recorded on the city's YouTube channel. During the meeting, when you are not participating, please mute yourself by clicking on the microphone icon found on the lower left-hand side of the Zoom menu next to the video icon. Muting your microphone during the meeting will make it easier for everyone to hear. You will be able to unmute if and when you want to speak. In some cases, I may mute or unmute people as needed to minimize distractions during the meeting. Please remember to state your name every time you speak for the benefit of those listening remotely. You can also turn your video camera on or off by clicking the video icon in the menu. For the purposes of this public meeting, when you are participating in the meeting, please keep your video on. When you are not participating in the meeting, it is okay to turn your video off. You will still be able to listen to the meeting when your video is off. You will just have to remember to turn your video back on when you're participating. Turning your video off when you are not participating will help make sure that the active meeting participants can be seen on the screen. In some cases, I may turn someone's video off if they are not actively participating to minimize distraction during the meeting. You can always turn your video back on during the meeting. If you have any trouble, you can send me a chat. If you're participating by phone, you can click *6 to unmute your phone, and you can click *9 if you want to raise your hand to provide public comment. For those using Zoom, somewhere on your screen you will see a choice to toggle between speaker and gallery view. Speaker view shows the active speaker, while gallery view tiles all the meeting participants. And now I'll turn the meeting back over to Mayor Finkeldine.
Mayor Finkeldine, thank you, Porter. I'll now do roll call. Vice Mayor Shipley.
Here.
Commissioner Nanda.
Here.
Commissioner Lawson.
Here.
Commissioner Willey.
Here.
Mayor Finkeldine is present, so we're all present and accounted for. And before we get into the agenda, we'll ask Sherry Riedemann, our city clerk, to talk about the procedures for the meeting.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just going to provide a few procedural reminders for the virtual meeting. Commissioners, you must remember to state your name and title each time you speak, and all motions need to be stated clearly. Mayor, after a motion is made and seconded, you will need to call on commissioners individually to provide their vote. Then announce whether the motion carried and the count of the vote. City staff that is present via Zoom, you must also state your name and title each time you speak. When the mayor calls for public comment on an item, individuals participating via Zoom should use the raise hand function to indicate they wish to provide comments. When the mayor calls for public comment on an item, the raised hand function may appear in different places on your Zoom menu depending on the device you are using and which version of Zoom you have. Individuals will be called upon by name in the order they appear on the meeting host screen. When you are called on, please unmute your listening device and state your name before speaking. The regular 3-minute time limit will apply. The mayor will then call for in-person public comment for those without access to technology options. Staff present will direct you to the podium to speak, following social distancing and safety protocols, and the regular 3-minute time limit will apply. Thank you.
Mayor Finkeldine, thank you, Sherry. We'll now move to the agenda. The first item is to approve the agenda. The City Commission reserves the right to amend, supplement, or reorder the agenda during the meeting. And we often don't use this feature, but I would like to move item C8A, which is the special use permit for the Water Tower Park, to regular agenda item number 2. I think there's going to be some significant discussion. We've had a lot of people sign up to discuss this item, and we have some guests here on the Kaw Nation, and I'd rather move that to agenda item number 2. And so if I don't see any objections, I would make that motion and approve the rest of the agenda.
Yes, Commissioner Willey, I'll second that.
Mayor, before you take, this is Sherry Reederman, City Clerk, before you take the vote, just so I'm clear, so you want it to be regular agenda item 2, and then we'll do the strategic plan as 3. Okay,
Mayor Finkeldine, correct, Sherry.
thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other discussion, there was a motion on the floor by the mayor, a second by Commissioner Willey. I vote aye. Commissioner Willey?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Ananda?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Thank you, Mayor Finkeldine. Oops. Thank you for that. Now we will move on to item number 2, which is the recognition and proclamation. And the item tonight is to proclaim Monday, January 25th as Dale Willey Day. Is there anyone present who would like to say anything before I read the proclamation?
Mayor, this is Bonnie Lowe. Can I say a few words?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Apparently I wasn't listening very closely to protocol, so my apologies. Good evening. I'm Bonnie Lowe, the President and CEO of the Lawrence Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Commissioners for acknowledging Dale Willey with tonight's proclamation. As I believe all of you know, Dale was an outstanding individual, and he left us all too soon. Dale represented the best of the best and unselfishly gave of his time and money and never asking for anything in return. He was a mentor to many and a supporter of all. His legacy is far-reaching, and we are very appreciative of Dale, along with Miles Schneer, for their leadership in establishing the Peasley Auto Lab. This teaching opportunity has been renamed as the Dale Willey Auto Lab, which is very fitting. On behalf of Miles, Kevin Kelly, Greg Maurer, and many others, we are thankful for this public recognition. Dale's wife, Jan Willey, and his family are also appreciative of this honor. Thanks so much.
Mayor Finkeldine, thank you, Bonnie. I will now read the proclamation. Whereas Dale Willey was born July 15th, 1941, in Kansas City, Missouri, the son of Joseph Howard Willey and Geneva Ruth Bullen Willey. And whereas in 1970, Dale purchased the Pontiac Cadillac dealership in Lawrence and was active in the Kansas Automobile Dealers Association. Dale was elected president of the KADA in 1991, and in 1993, he was voted the Time Quality Dealer of Kansas. In 1997, Dale was elected as the Kansas director of the National Automobile Dealers Association and was elected the NADA chairman in 2006, serving as chairman in 2007. And whereas Dale belonged to numerous organizations, including the Lawrence Noon Rotary Club and the Lawrence Breakfast Cosmopolitan Club, and was presented as the Citizen of the Year by the Lawrence Noon Kiwanis Club in 2019. He was a member of the Lawrence Chamber of Commerce since 1971, serving on the board and as chairman in 1996. Dale was instrumental in the founding of Lawrence Junior Achievements Lawrence Business Hall of Fame, and was inducted as a laureate in 2015. And whereas Dale was a supporter of DECA, Boys and Girls Club, and Peasley Tech, he was very instrumental in the formation of the Automotive Tech program at Peasley Tech, which has been named in his honor. He was also a supporter of LMH Health, Lawrence Public Library, and the Lawrence Arts Center. Now, therefore, I, Brad Finkeldine, Mayor of the City of Lawrence, do hereby proclaim Monday, January 25th, 2021, as Dale Willey Day, in recognition of the countless contributions Dale Willey has made to the city of Lawrence. And on a personal note, I mean, Dale did so much for the community that one resolution just doesn't satisfy it. I got to know Dale through his work on Family Promise. He served on the Family Promise board, was a major donor of Family Promise. Of course, I knew Dale before that from other activities, but that's another example of one of the many activities he was involved in, and he'll certainly be missed by the whole community. So thank you, and thank you to his wife and family for all the times they let him work out there in the community. So happy to do that. And thank you, Bonnie.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, now we will move on to the consent agenda. All matters listed below on the consent agenda are considered under one motion and will be enacted by one motion. There'll be no separate discussion on those items. If discussion is desired, the item will be removed from the consent agenda and will be considered separately. Members of the public wishing to speak to an item that has been pulled off the consent agenda will be limited to 3 minutes for comments. Again, just to note, item C8A has already been removed from the consent agenda. Do any commissioners wish to pull any other items from the consent agenda? Seeing no items from the commissioners, does any member of the public wish to pull an item besides C8A from the consent agenda? If you are interested in doing so, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature on Zoom. Or if you're present, let Sherry know.
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. There is no public comment on this item, and I will note, Mayor, that currently we do not have anyone attending the meeting at City Hall.
Mayor Finkelstein, thank you. Obviously, let me know if anyone shows up. If not, I'll dispense from that part going forward. So do I have a motion for the consent agenda?
This is Commissioner Boley. I move approval of all the remaining items on the consent agenda.
Commissioner Larson, second.
Mayor Finkelstein, we have a motion by Commissioner Boley, a second by Commissioner Lawson. Commissioner Boley?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Ananda?
Aye.
Mayor Finkelstein, aye. Consent agenda passes 5-0. We'll now move to public comment. The public is allowed to speak to any items or issues except those scheduled on the consent agenda or regular agenda portions of the agenda. As a general practice, the Commission will not discuss or debate these items, nor will the Commission make decisions on items presented during this time. Rather, they will refer the items to staff for follow-up if necessary. Individuals should address all comments and questions to the Commission. Each person will be limited to 3 minutes. If any member of the public would like to make general public comment, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature on Zoom.
Chris Flowers, please unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Chris Flowers, and last week during the talk about how we're going to choose our government, I guess you guys are going to form a committee, and I just wanted to make a few more suggestions on who I'd like to see on the committee. Like last week I said we needed diversity, and I don't just mean like the traditional like race or LGBTQ, but also, like, for instance, I would like someone who lives in Douglas County but not in Lawrence, just in case there is a possibility of discussing a consolidated city-county form of government. I think it'd be good to have a non-Lawrence but still Douglas County voice at the table. And also another who else I'd like to see is a third party or an independent. Someone who's not Democrat or Republican, because if the talk turns to like how we do our primaries, like when we do county this past summer, I was independent, but I had to switch over to Democrat just to be able to vote. And in that like in this past primary, most of the races were decided in it. And I knew someone who was a libertarian and she couldn't vote because she wasn't going to change her affiliation. And then also, I'd like to see maybe a former commissioner who can bring the perspective of a candidate. Like, if we're going to be talking 2 or 4 year terms, like how difficult is it for a candidate to have to be campaigning every 2 years instead of 4? And I'd just like to mention, I'd like to see someone try to get Matthew Herbert to be on this, because I think he'd do a great job. And then also, I'd like to touch on something else now, and that's the talk about the city streets. And last week we talking about major roads, and I would like to ask that we change 17-501 of the city code, which currently states that the primary function of a major main traffic way is for the movement of through traffic. And we changed this to also include a definition as to get bond money, since according to city staff, a lot of the streets listed as major roads do not serve the purpose of moving through traffic. And it sounded like they were just put there so we could get bond money to build stuff on it. So if we're going to have a city code that defines what a major road does, but the major road doesn't meet that definition, we need to either change the definition of what the major road is, or we need to remove those roads that are not currently serving the listed purpose off that list. So just wanted to say that. Thank you.
This is Sherry Reederman, City Clerk. If you would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand, physically or virtually. Mayor, no one else has indicated that they wish to speak to provide general public comment.
Mayor Finkelstein, thank you, Sherry.
Oh,
We'll move to
Mayor,
regular.
I apologize. Someone did just indicate that they want to speak to this item. Chad Osdahl, if you would go ahead and please unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name is Chad Osdale. I work for MSO. I'm here to ask the same thing I asked last week and for the past couple of weeks about having the evaluation process put on the agenda. I can't seem to get anybody to do that, so we seem to be answering questions one at a time from the city manager after his report. I would just like somebody, either the city manager or Tony, to explain how the evaluation process is fair and ethical. If the scores are preset a year before any job performance is done, and it is preset differently in each department, I don't want to waste anybody's time. So I'll be back at the end of the meeting to do a public comment for the city manager, and I'd appreciate somebody to answer afterwards. I realize you don't want to talk to me, but if he'd answer afterwards, I'd appreciate it. Thank you very much, and that's all I have for now.
This is Sherry.
Mayor Finkelstein. Sherry, I assume there's no one else?
That's correct.
Mayor Finkelstein, thank you, Sherry. We'll now move to regular agenda item 1, which is a discussion of the letter received by Lynn Williams, Chairwoman of the Kaw Nation, requesting return of what is often called the Big Red Rock, currently situated in Robertson Park. I believe Tony will lead this off.
That's correct. Tony Wheeler, City Attorney. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. As you may recall, in early December, then Mayor Jennifer Ananda received a letter from Lynn Williams, Chairwoman of the Kaw Nation. Ms. Williams wrote to the mayor regarding the rock located in Robinson Park. In the letter, Chairwoman Williams explained that that rock has great cultural and spiritual significance to her people. She indicated that it was a sacred item and that it is a spiritual item of prayer. The Kaw people lived in Lawrence, and Kansas is their ancestral land before they were removed by the U.S. government to Oklahoma. Further in her letter, Ms. Williams stated that at a meeting in October, the citizens of the Kaw Nation voted overwhelmingly to have the rock returned to the Kaw Nation. Chairwoman Williams, in her letter to the mayor, was asking or requesting on behalf of her people that the rock be returned. At your meeting on December 9th, this letter was discussed briefly when Vice Chair Shipley brought it up during commissioner comments. All of the commissioners expressed a receptiveness to the idea, and they requested that staff schedule this matter for discussion at a future commission meeting. So that's how we arrived tonight. Since that time, representatives of the city have had informal discussions with representatives of the Kaw Nation and other interested parties. And those conversations have been very cordial and respectful. Our office has performed some research, and we have identified no legal barriers to the city's ability to return the rock to the Kaw Nation. We do, however, recommend that we should confirm this agreement with the Board of County Commissioners of Douglas County because the rock sits on land that is indicated in historical records as belonging to Douglas County. I have had preliminary discussions with County Administrator Sarah Plinsky, and she has also been positive and receptive to this idea and indicated that she thought that the Board of County Commissioners would consider this item in the future. We have also heard from community members. The commissioners have received offers of assistance of both time and funds to support the project of removing the big red rock. There may also be grant funds or community donations that could cover a portion or all of the costs that it would take to move this rock. It is estimated to be between 23 and 25 tons, so it will be no small feat to relocate it. Also, I wanted to indicate that the city could assist the Kaw Nation in its applications for grant funds by either writing a letter of support if they submit a grant application, or if appropriate, joining in a grant application. And staff can work with partners to explore such grant opportunities if the commission so desires. So in summary, the commission could move forward with this request, and staff has identified 4 action items that the commission could take. First and foremost would be to authorize the mayor to send a formal written response to Chairwoman Williams' letter, acknowledging receipt of her request and expressing an intention to work with the Kaw Nation and other community partners to relocate the rock. Secondly, you could direct staff to prepare a joint resolution of the City Commission and the Board of County Commissioners for approval by both governing bodies at a public meeting, stating the intention to relinquish the rock to the Kaw Nation and to work collaboratively on the project. Third, the commission could direct staff to continue to work with representatives of the Kaw Nation and other community partners on the project, including exploring grant opportunities to cover the costs associated with its relocation and related costs, developing preliminary and final plans for moving the rock, and addressing any community events, if any, associated with the move. Finally, we would encourage you to direct staff to report back to the commission periodically on the progress of this project. So with that, I would stand for questions, but I believe there are other people on the call that may also want to speak to this matter. Thank you.
Mayor Fingeldine, thank you. Tony, do any commissioners have questions for Tony before we open it up to comment? Seeing no questions, if you would like to speak on this item, and Tony, I don't know if we have any specific representatives that we should let speak first, but if you all wanting to make any public comment on this item, you can raise your hand using the raise your hand feature or wave otherwise.
Mayor?
Yes.
Tony Wheeler, City Attorney. I do know that the Vice Chair of the Kaw Nation, Mr. James Pepper Henry, is on the call, but I'm not sure if he planned to give remarks. He may just be wanting to observe. But he was designated by Chairwoman Williams as one of the designated representatives of the nation, Kaw Nation, and he is one of the people that I have been communicating with informally.
Mayor Finkel, I thank you, Tony. Mr. Henry, would you like to say anything before we'll go ahead and let you begin the process as a representative of the requester, and then we'll open it up to regular public comment.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is James Pepper Henry. I'm Vice Chairman of the Kaw Nation. On behalf of Chairwoman Williams, I want to thank you for the opportunity to address the City Council today. And we are very excited that the City Council is considering our request because we are a sovereign nation of people. Ms. Williams would like some kind of formal response to her letter to the city or to the mayor. And so just so that we can establish formal relations, and then after that point, we can continue our dialogue. But we, as I said, we're very grateful that the city is considering our request. And once we receive formal communication from mayor's office, we'd like to continue the conversation about the rock. And we refer to the rock as Injunje Wahobe, which means a sacred item to us in our language. So that's what we call the rock, by the way.
Mayor Finkel, I thank you for those comments. We'll now go ahead and open it up to general public comment, and Sherry will call on those as she sees them on the screen.
Carrie Altenburn, if you want to go ahead and unmute and state your name, you have 3 minutes.
Yes, this is Carrie Altenburn. I'm here tonight to support the return of the rock to the Kaw Nation. Through no fault of their own, they lost possession of it, and the way that Lawrence dealt with it and got it here was not particularly one of the shining examples of Lawrence history. It being sacred to the Kaw means that they should get it back and have control of it again. And for several reasons, that's an important spot. It's significant that is probably on the actual path that the 3 men who were lynched in 1882 were drugged from the Douglas County Jail across that stretch of property. And that needs to be used for something along the lines of making Lawrence history understood more to people. And the rock is a sacred object to the Kaw. So I think the city should do the 4 proposals from staff, work with the county, and do all it can to get it back to them and put up so that it's in a location that is proper to its sacredness. Thank you.
Jay Johnson, please unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Dr. Jay Johnson, Lawrence resident, and here representing the group Between the Rock and a Hard Place, which has been working over the last 16 months with a very small grant from the Mellon Foundation through the Interchange Project, led by Lawrence resident Dave Lowenstein and Kaw Nation citizen Pauline Sharp. The group has been working before COVID to hold community gatherings and to determine the Lawrence community's support for the return of the rock. Our work, historical and with the Lawrence community, led to more members of the Kaw Nation joining our group over the last 16 months, including Jim Pepper Henry, and has led to the Kaw Nation's request for the return of the rock. We are now looking at the next stage of this process, and we are hoping for the safe return of the rock and the development of infrastructure at Alagoeo Park in Council Grove, where the tribe determined that they would like to move the rock. We're also aware of the future of the founder's plaque that is currently affixed to the rock, and that is something of significance to the history of the city. And we're also concerned with the future of Robinson Park. Should there be a new monument? And what sort of city process should be engaged in determining that? Should the park have the same name or a new name? And how can we continue to build a relationship between the city of Lawrence and the Kaw Nation so that we can right this wrong that was committed back in 1929? So as director of a small research center, the Center for Indigenous Research, Science, and Technology at the University of Kansas, which operates with the Institute for Policy and Social Research, I've offered to take the lead in helping to pull together a team that represents the current group that's been working through the Interchange Grant, Kaw Nation, City of Lawrence, and the University of Kansas, to see if we can apply for some grant funding to not only help with the first stage, which is the return and move of the rock to Alagoeo Park, but then also the second stage, which is more the city engagement with discussions about the future of Robinson Park. So I'm happy to answer any questions and very grateful to be able to speak tonight in favor of the return of the rock.
This is Sherry Reederman, City Clerk. If there is anyone else who would like to provide public comment on this item, please raise your hand. Mayor, it looks like that's all the public comment on this item.
Mayor Finkeldine, thank you, Sherry. We'll bring this item back up to the commission for questions or comments.
Vice Mayor Shipley. Yeah, just a couple things. And Dr. Johnson mentioned the plaque. That was a question I had too, because I just didn't hear staff mention it specifically in their recommendations. Seems like its removal might need to have some planning. In addition to the theft of the rock, we defaced it by putting a plaque on it. And we do want to save the plaque, obviously, for its own historical reasons. And I'm glad that Between the Rock and a Hard Place is there to engage the public in what to do with that. So I wanted to make sure that was on the list. And then I want to make sure that when we write the joint letter or however we're doing the letter, that we refer to it consistently as Injuja Wahobe, just out of respect. And then we've talked about the return, but we haven't been specific about an apology. So I'd like that to be part of our conversation.
This is Commissioner Nanda. I would agree with what Vice Mayor has mentioned. I think that we have to be very intentional around an apology because I'm sorry doesn't cut it, I think, in this instance. And so how do we really develop those relationships in a way that is indicative of the magnitude and the understanding of the magnitude of what this community did with that project. I think that all 4 of those recommendations are reasonable. I appreciate the opportunity to work with partners to make this happen. I would include in Dr. Johnson's comments, he mentioned working with the city to work toward those grants. I think the county would have to be part of the conversation for the future of that park. And I don't know the extent to which the city has any kind of authority over that process.
This is Commissioner Larson. I would agree with both Commissioner Shipley as well as Ananda. Regarding this matter, I would add that I'm part of the Community Remembrance Project, which is in the process of working to provide notation to the lynchings that occurred in the 1860s. As part of those discussions, we have been talking about once the rock or if the rock is moved as to what to do with that park or what sort of memories we want to place there as far as plaques. So we would be interested, obviously, in hearing what the city has to say about that and being part of that process if we could.
This is Commissioner Boley. I concur. I also would like to point out that I'm on the NAACP History Committee that's also been working on the lynching memorials. And I appreciate the staff work and the partnership that we're developing. So I support the proposals.
Mayor Finkeldine, I appreciate all the comments tonight. Certainly appreciate James Pepper Henry being here and making the comments. We look forward to working with you and drafting and sending you that formal letter in the near future. And for Jay Johnson and all his work and his group's work, we look forward to working with you. Tony, question for Tony. Do you anticipate this joint resolution allowing the city and county to work together on these issues, or do you think that's necessary, or how do you think that's going to play out on who directs what happens eventually to the park?
City Attorney Tony Wheeler. Yes, I think that after tonight's meeting, I will touch base again with County Administrator Sarah Plinsky and get some guidance from her on the County Commission's role. But it has been correctly pointed out that the land on which the rock sits is land that records show is owned by the county. And so certainly plans for the future use of that land will have to involve the county. My thoughts on the resolution was to have the county join us in this stating an intention to return the rock and giving staff the authority to work collaboratively with others on grant opportunities and other planning duties. And certainly an apology or apology language could be added to that resolution. Again, I would want to touch base with the county staff to get their thoughts on it as well. Is that responsive to your question, sir?
Mayor Finkeldine, definitely responsive to my question.
This is Commissioner Ananda. I know that it's not necessarily within the scope of what we're talking about this evening, but I do think that the driver for what happens with that plaque, whether it is removed or how it is removed or not, should be driven by the Kaw Nation because we did deface a sacred object, and that removal could further damage that object's value as far as a sacred object for them. And I would say they're fully within their rights to say, you know what, that's ours now. And I think that they should be the driver in that conversation.
Certainly, Tony Wheeler, City Attorney. Certainly, Commissioner Ananda, we will communicate very closely with representatives of the Kaw Nation. In fact, in our preliminary discussions, Mr. Pepper Henry recommended that one of the first things that needs to occur would be to have an evaluation of the rock, the condition of the rock, by an experienced geologist. So I imagine that will be one of the first steps. And of course, we will work very closely with the representatives designated by Chairwoman Williams on any steps that are taken. So thank you for those comments.
Mayor Finkel, I thank you for those comments. I certainly agree. I think we'd be, if there's no other comments, I think this is certainly something we're going to keep pushing forward on and do all we can to right the wrongs of the past and do it in the best way possible in collaboration with the Kaw Nation. So I think we're looking for a motion to direct staff to proceed on the 4 action items. Maybe we want to amend them slightly to include what's been discussed tonight, although I think they have direction, but we could include that in the motion.
Vice Mayor Shipley, I would like to make a motion to direct staff to move forward with the 4 items, the 4 items they recommended to move forward with this project and our partners.
Commissioner Hernandez, second.
Mayor Finkel, aye. We have a motion and a second. Seeing no further discussion. Vice Mayor Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Ananda?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Commissioner Willey?
Aye.
Mayor Finkel, aye. The motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much for attending tonight, and we look forward to working with both Mr. Henry and Mr. Johnson in the future. Thank you. Okay, we are now ready to move to new agenda item number 2, which is to receive the final site plan for the special use permit for the Water Tower Park. And I'm not sure, I know, who wants to lead off on that, if that's Sandy or Randy wants to speak. Maybe Randy will lead.
Yes. This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. I just want, before we got into this matter and heard anything more, just kind of clarify what we are doing here tonight. As you recall, in December, when this SUP appeared before the City Commission, it was directed that the site plan appear before the City Commission before it went through the process of approval or disapproval before the Planning Department. So tonight, the final site plan is before you. Your duty is to receive it, and perhaps maybe to give direction to MSO as your representative, as the landowner in this case, regarding the site plan, whether you're happy with it or not happy with it, whether you want any changes, want it to go forward, maybe you have no comment whatsoever. So really, you're here to receive it and perhaps give direction. I want to make sure you know that with respect to this, you have 2 capacities perhaps going forward. One is as the landowner and the applicant, and the second is as perhaps in the future an appeal from a decision regarding the site plan. So tonight we're not making any decisions or doing any of those types of deals, and we're not making any final decision. As you know, a site plan is a ministerial function. Planning Department typically looks at a site plan and then will approve or disapprove regarding whether or not it meets the city code or the conditions of the SUP. If it meets city code and the conditions of the SUP, then it has to be approved. If it does not, then it has to be denied. And that's basically the function, and that's the nature of the ministerial function. So that's where we are in the site plan. There is the potential then in the future that once the planning director issues that decision, there may be an appeal to the City Commission, and you will have to determine whether or not you agree whether the planning director has applied the code correctly or interpreted the code correctly. But that, we're not going to decide that tonight or look at that tonight. Your goal is just basically as the landowner, not as a decision maker, to receive the site plan and give direction as you see fit. So if the commission has any questions regarding any of that, I am here to answer.
Mayor Finkeldye, Randy, I think that was very helpful to understand that distinction. Normally we are here maybe possibly on an appeal or as a third party, but here we're the applicant, so I think that's an important distinction. Sandy, would you like to make any comments?
Yes, thank you, Sandy Day. I don't have much to add from what the clarification that Randy has provided for you. The drawing that you have tonight is a reflection of the actions that you took December the 1st to approve the special use permit with conditions that were outlined in the ordinance. That ordinance was revised and presented to you on the 15th. And part of that direction at the commission meeting was to provide that revised drawing for your receipt, which is where we're at tonight. So this drawing is in response to those specific conditions laid out by ordinance at that previous meeting. And I'm happy to answer any questions. No, there is additional staff here as well to answer specific questions. Thank you.
Mayor Finkeldye, thank you. I have one question, and maybe other questions are out there before we move on. If, I guess as the applicant, and maybe this is a question for Randy, if as the applicant, we wanted to make a change that's different from what's in the SUP, could we do that, or what would the process have to be to do that?
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. Yes, you have already issued an ordinance, passed an ordinance approving the SUP with certain conditions. If changes were to be made to that, it would have to go back through the process. An application would have to be filed. It'd have to go to the Planning Commission, and then for a recommendation, and then come back to the City Commission for final decision regarding any potential change or amendment to the existing SUP. So it would have to go through the whole process once again.
Mayor Finkeldye, thank you for that. Other questions for staff before we hear from the public?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Larson. There seems to be concern that some of the requests by the commission was not included or was not accurately included in the site plan. Have those concerns been addressed by staff? And if not, can they address it to us tonight? I believe that staff has received the letter from one of the neighbors regarding this issue.
This is Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager for MSO. Commissioner Larson, staff feels that the site plan that has been put forth for receival tonight does meet all of the criteria set forth in the ordinance that was passed on December 15th.
Okay. So some of the, Commissioner Larson again, and so some of the items that was of concern is that the distance was not properly laid out in the site plan in accordance with what was discussed at the commission meeting. And there was some concern about sidewalk widths, as well as lighting in the building, the Douglas County building, the fact that it can stay, but that's not indicated, maybe indicated on the site plan. Could you address those specific items?
This is Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. Yes, Commissioner Larson, I can address those specific things. In the ordinance, it stated that the revised site plan would locate the proposed water tower 30 to 37 feet west of the north central location that was presented at December 1st. That did happen. We did move it 37 feet to the west, putting it approximately 30 feet from the existing tower. So that was met. The Douglas County Emergency Management Building, it was proposed that the building be reused or relocated if possible. Commissioner Larson, that will be dictated more by Douglas County Community Management, because they, depending on if they reuse or get new satellite systems for their equipment, will dictate what they plan to do with that building, either reuse the old or, have the new. So we're letting them evaluate that process based on our site plan and the movement of the tower and how that affects them. And again, that's their own budgetary constraints and project that, ties in with this project. The sidewalk, it was proposed to put, sorry, I'm trying to read on the ordinance specifically about the sidewalk. It was proposed that the sidewalk should be 10 foot on the west side, and additional lighting on the west side of the property. And that's items G and H. And both of those items in the ordinance have been met on this site plan. And I believe I have addressed the distance, the sidewalk, the lighting, and Douglas County building. Was there anything else, Commissioner Larson?
There was the sidewalk on the north side being 16 feet wide. Was that specified in the ordinance?
Treatment Division Manager, Commissioner Larson, no, it was not, but that is dictated by the fire department, because they have to have access to the tower in order to perform rescues. So that portion of the roadway, because of the shift, therefore triggered that drive to need to be at least 16 feet wide in order to accommodate the turn movements of the fire apparatus. So that is put forth via the city planning review process, and that's dictated by the fire department. And the standard roadway width for fire access is typically 20 feet wide. We are seeking a variance for 16 feet.
If I may interrupt or add to what Leah has just said, Sandy Day Planning, with regard to the fire access on the north side, that is actually a code modification. Typically, as Leah mentioned, those access drives would be much wider to facilitate their access, but also to facilitate those operations. To have a narrower drive, reduced down to 16 feet. We were working closely with Fire Prevention Division to assess that code modification and would be codified through the site plan process for that reduced width for the fire drive. It is wider than originally anticipated.
Commissioner Larson, thank you very much. Now, the sidewalk that's proposed on the south side, is that still in play?
Sandy Day Planning, yes, that is a code requirement of the subdivision regulations that require sidewalks on both sides of a public street when property is platted. This project is subject to the subdivision regulations, and therefore public sidewalk is required on both sides of the public street. That has been a part of the project throughout its inception.
Commissioner Larson, thank you. Sandy, now the sidewalk is just there at the park then. There's no other sidewalk going west from that location, is there?
Sandy Day Planning, that was one of the things I meant to look at. I'm told that it is not. I don't recall off the top of my head where that sidewalk there terminates. That is, like I said, part of the subdivision regulations. We do see one lot application development that includes compliance with city design standards for that kind of public infrastructure, so public sidewalk.
Commissioner Larson, thank you.
Mayor Finkelstein, are there other questions before we go to public comment? Seeing no questions at the moment, we would open this up to public comment. If you would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand using the raise the hand feature. and Sherry will call on you as you appear on the screen.
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. I just want to reiterate that even if you registered via Zoom, that doesn't indicate which item you wish to speak to. So please raise your hand using the raise hand function, and if you do not know how to do that, please just raise your hand physically. And make sure your video is on. Steve Scannell, please go ahead, unmute, state your name, and you will have 3 minutes.
Thank you. It might be helpful if city staff could display the site plan that has my comments on it while I talk. So I'm going to basically throw out all the comments that I prepared given the discussion that I heard earlier. I believe that instead of asking the City Commission simply to deny approving this site plan, that consistent with what your attorney said, that it's more appropriate that we ask that you start the process over completely. Send it back to the Planning Commission. I believe that city staff and the consulting engineers or whoever took notes at the last meeting misinterpreted the intent or just wrote them down literally without understanding within the context of all the discussions what the City Commission's intent was regarding a number of the details that I've been advocating for on behalf of my neighbors. And I would ask that the City Commission tonight, when you deny approving this site plan and send it back, that you also include the 12 specific items, if you agree with them, and I hope you do, so that city staff and the consulting engineers have specific directions on things that need to be done, and that those can go through the planning process, again, in a more orderly and a thoughtful manner, with appropriate public input, not just a survey, but some discussions where we can go through all these details which matter to the neighbors and come up with something that's in the best interest of both the city and the water department and the fire department and all the city entities, but also the neighbors and the city at large, so that we preserve the beauty of this small residential park, which is not a commercial or industrial site, that we have an opportunity to consider and pursue other non-standard but equally good ways to do things, and that would achieve the same results in a different manner than using standard intersection details or driveway details or pavement details or whatever. Hopefully you've all seen my site plan with my drawing. You understand the things that I've recommended in it as far as maintaining the look of a 10-foot bike path while still acknowledging the need for fire truck access, and using a reddish brown colored concrete with a brick pattern in it on each side of that 10-foot wide standard concrete bike path. As far as the appearance, the fact that I believe that the intent was never understood as far as, and not embraced, to move the tower as far west as you can. I've shown how that can be done. You can move it 37 feet from the face of the existing tank to the new tank, not the perimeter, and from the EMS fence. So with that, I'll just stop since my time's up, and hopefully during your discussion later after this and after my other neighbors talk, we can get into the details, but please send it back and let's restart this process. Thank you.
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. Is there anyone else who would like to provide comment on this item? Regina Kraus, please unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Regina Kraus, a resident of West Hills Homes Association, current president of our board. I just wanted to speak tonight to support Steve's comments, both verbally here at the meeting and his markups to the most recent site plan. It does seem that some of the comments in the ordinance as they were restated tonight and as they were shown in the revised site plan may have been misunderstood. 10-foot sidewalk on the west side, for instance, and the lighting. None of the neighbors I've spoken to intended that. That was proposed for the north side. So I think no one supports a widened sidewalk on the west. And this isn't the most major detail of the project, but I think it's just indicative of the lack of communication or the difficulty we've had communicating with the staff on this project. So I too would urge you to consider stepping back and taking just a little more time at this stage of the project to do it right. This isn't an open site that's utilitarian in nature. It's a neighborhood park that's hemmed in on all sides in the midst of a dense, long developed neighborhood. This land is small and close to all of our homes. It matters significantly to us. So I think the project deserves just a closer look at the planning stage before we move forward. It doesn't seem to be particularly urgent in nature, getting this work done. So I think if we could just step back a bit, this is an important threshold before the project moves forward. So I too would just ask you to consider stepping back and allowing more community engagement that has more significance through the design process. There was one more point I just wanted to point out. I wanted to just ask about the evergreen tree. It's a large, mature evergreen that's near the center of the park. I think mature plantings are important because we can't regain those instantly. So I just wanted to ask about the removal of that tree. It doesn't seem to be that close to the project. So I just wanted to ask that measures are taken to keep as much mature landscaping as possible. So I think that wraps it up. Thank you for hearing us again tonight.
Lynn Segebrecht, if you wanted to provide comment on this item still, please turn on your unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Hello, I'm Lynn Segebrecht. I wanted to share with you tonight a letter that was submitted to the Planning Commission months ago by an elderly couple in their 90s. Their names are Bill and Jean Mitchell, who live in the West Hills neighborhood and have been extremely distressed by this proposal from the get-go, and more so now. They are very sharp. They are very well read. They read the Journal World cover to cover. I would like to share the letter as I was given permission to do by Bill and Jean over the phone on Sunday. We did not respond to the earlier neighborhood notification, 27 July, of the water tower replacement project because of our physical decline. But as the project moves forward, as inexorably as our decline, we must express our historical connection to the water tower and its park and our extreme dissatisfaction with the planned change. We came to Lawrence in 1949 and 1950 and lived next door to each other, Delta Gamma and Delta Upsilon, just east of the old water tower, predecessor of the existing one. Sometime in the 50s, the old and much painted tower was replaced by the present one in approximately the same location, thus making the city's argument, as expressed in the newspaper, that it is impossible to build a new tower in the same place as the old, not believable. Its believability is further reduced by the new tanks in the same place as the old on Oread Boulevard, north of the Alumni Association. We moved back into this neighborhood, West Hills, in 1964, and have been contributing members of the Lawrence neighborhood and Lawrence community ever since, having written many underlined letters to both the City Commission and the Planning Commission. This is probably our last letter, but not, we hope, our most futile. This neighborhood, once and still a choice residential area, which as evidence of our, quote, good neighborliness, unquote, paid ourselves, underlined, for the sidewalks in this area when Hillcrest School was built and when Iowa Street was a rock road, has survived in spite of multi-family zoning incursions and increased traffic. There were 2 cars at the DG house, the house mothers and 1 girls. The existence of the city park at Stratford and Sunset has contributed to the stability of the neighborhood, and its rezoning to, quote, industrial will have a huge negative impact on more than just property values.
Lynn?
Our personal concern, Mr. Finkeldeep, they can't communicate with you, so please allow me to continue. They can't communicate with you. Our personal concern is primarily for the area east of the park, but also for what's known as the Hillcrest neighborhood, west and north of the park. Stable residential neighborhoods are essential to the livability of our town, and short-sightedness like this proposal is a town killer. Hillcrest neighborhood is already fragile and will become more so should the water tower be moved and the green space reduced. We know that technically the green space may not be reduced because the park size is increased by reducing the street right-of-ways on Sunset and Stratford, but functionally it is reduced and is made vastly less desirable by the roadway that replaces the north sidewalk in the park. A park is not enhanced by more and heavier traffic. We hope this Planning Commission will vote against not a new water tower, but this proposed reconfiguration of a precious city jewel and its surrounding neighborhoods. We hope, too, that the City Commission, to whom this is sent, will realize that the need for a new water tower does not require the abandonment of viable neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. Is there anyone else who would like to provide comment on this item?
Steve? Raise your hand.
Mute. I tried it and it said I was blocked.
If there is someone else who would like to provide comment, you can go ahead and state your name if you're not able to use the technology option. I can't see anyone else on my video that has their hand raised. And we certainly don't want to leave anyone out.
I can talk.
Okay.
I'm sorry, can you hear me? This is Paula Martin.
Yes.
Go ahead, Paula, then Steve Segerbach can go next. Go ahead, Paula.
I can't get my video to start because it says the host has blocked me. But if you can hear me, all I want to say is I am a board member and I'm also a 35-year homeowner in West Hills with my husband, Kurt Falkenstein. You won't be surprised to know we've had a lot of emails amongst the neighbors about this. And I just want to voice my agreement with the things that my other neighbors have said, particularly Steve and Regina. Thank you.
Mayor Finkelstein, Steve Segerbach can go now.
Thank you. It's nice to be able to address the City Commission, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I also wanted to just state that I do support what Steve Scannell has said. I wanted to add a couple of things that no one has talked about, and I've never mentioned to Planning Commission or City Commission to date, and that is that once this is built, I feel that there might be some things that could be done to the tower to enhance its blending into the surrounding park and that would be to look at possibly having ivy, English ivy going up the tower at certain places. I think that would probably make it less obtrusive. I also think that there should be opportunity to do things such as having a beehive established in the tower, very similar to what we have up at the Natural History Museum, where the bees go in from the outside of the building and then there's a hive inside. If that could be done, the bee population is of concern throughout the country and the world, and it's important to have bees, and the best place for them to survive is within the city limits. The other would be is bat population, and possibly incorporate that. I think there are a lot of different ideas that could be done, and so I would suggest that as we get into this and start doing some planning and thinking about this, that we also incorporate some things that really help the environment with this, and also can make this concrete base as easy to blend into the environment as possible. So anyway, thank you.
Caroline Groots, if you would please unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Yes, my name is Caroline Groots. Good evening. I am a Hillcrest neighborhood resident, and I am here as well to express my support for all the items that Steve Scannell and Regina Krause have mentioned. And I would hope that the City Commission decides to send this back and give us more time to work out these details. Thank you.
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. Mayor, I believe that is everyone that wants to provide comment on this item.
Mayor Finkelstein, thank you. We'll bring it back to the commission for questions or comments.
This is Commissioner Larson. I do have a question for staff as I'm looking at these sidewalks again, especially on that north side. I looked at the old plan that was brought for us, I believe, in December, and I was curious as to why the sidewalk that was depicted in there was not presented as 16 feet wide. It seems as though there's two sizes. One's a 10-foot to the east of the proposed tower, and the other is 5 foot to the west of the proposed tower. Why wasn't that 16-foot required sidewalk included as part of the initial plans brought before the commission?
This is Sandy Day with the Planning Office. The width of the sidewalk is a direct result of the review provided by fire prevention staff. So in the original application, the location of the tower that was very near to the east side of the property did not have to have that access drive. As we started to look at moving the tower to a central location, that was for discussion purposes. We had not evaluated the access piece at that time with fire. We were still working through those particular details.
Commissioner Larson, thank you. It just seems kind of odd to me that, we do, I don't know, probably hundreds or thousands of these site plans a year, and that the code should be known enough that the accurate sidewalk size would be put on some of the original plans. And since it was originally 10 feet, why can't we go back to that? And I guess just, why wouldn't staff know that in advance, that that's the code?
I think what we were attempting to do was to get some consensus. I'm sorry, Sandy Day again with the Planning Office. What we were attempting to do was to get some consensus from the commission, the location of where the tower would be located, whether it was in the northwest quadrant as a replacement, whether it was in the south half of the park, whether it was in the central location, knowing that we had a lot more details to work out. Those are difficult when we're looking at all of these different iterations.
Commissioner Washington, thank you. I'm still concerned that it almost seems like a switch and bait on us, or a bait and switch, whatever they call it, that was, the code's there and it wasn't properly depicted on one of the original plans. And, the 10 feet wide seemed to be okay, but now it's 16 feet wide. So I'm just concerned about that wasn't put earlier on the plans. That just seemed something common that should have been known by staff.
This is Commissioner Arnada. I guess that I heard that the reason that it was different on the further east proposal was that as we moved it west, it created a different requirement from the further east location as far as that width, because fire trucks would have to go further in. Did I understand that correctly? So we required that.
The same from Black and Beach. Commissioner Larson, I'll take the blame for that one. I'm the one that showed that access drive, and that was depicted as what we understood the utility only needed for their access. We had not evaluated and was not aware of the requirements of the fire department.
Chris King, Fire Medical, Mayor and Vice Mayor and Commissioners. The initial review was conducted when on the northeasterly location, it was adjacent to the road to where we would meet the 15 to 30 feet for our aerial access. And then we also had within the 150-foot access to the other smaller buildings that would house a generator or other switching equipment. As it did move westernly, that generated another review. And so the process kind of starts over again. We did work with MSO and planning and the engineers to identify a code modification that would facilitate access into the site. As we've discussed before, the 20-foot would be the minimum amount of access drive in those locations. But the engineers were able to auto turn, which is just a maneuvering on the CAD model to be able to provide the truck to be able to turn around. And so that's kind of how that evolved a little bit. So.
Commissioner Larson, thank you, Chris, and I do appreciate that explanation. I realize we got to have access for fire protection, and I'm not trying to say that's not important, but just as I said, it just seems like the process should have shown that from the very beginning. We should know the code enough. Commissioner Larson, I did have just one more question, and Leah, I know you talked about the 30 to 37 feet west. That was the request by the commission. I do remember the 30 to 37 feet, but I just can't recall whether we said west of the proposed location or from the old water tower. So that's where I was a little bit confused.
Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. Commissioner Larson, the actual verbiage that was stated was 30 to 37 feet closer to the tower. But again, I feel that this site plan meets kind of both of those because it is about 30 feet from the existing tower as well. And we did move it 37 feet closer to the existing tower from the first proposed location on December 1st.
Commissioner Larson, thank you. One more question. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Okay. Commissioner Larson, one more question on that sidewalk on the west side. Does it have to be 10 feet?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. We spent quite a bit of time going back over and re-listening to the exact wording of the motions. That was the wording of the motion, and so that's what became ordinance for this project.
Okay. Commissioner Larson, thank you very much, Sandy.
Mayor Finkel, I have a few questions. Sandy or maybe Chris King, there was some comments by the public about basically the entrance, being almost like a driveway entrance as opposed to looking more like a regular sidewalk or bike path. Is it required to have that driveway-like entrance, or could we have a direct looking more like a bike path?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. And this may be a point where engineers need to weigh in on that. We did have some conversations about the design of the access driveway, where the driveway intersects with the public street, having a city driveway apron that meets city specifications. We did have some conversations with the city engineer about some of those details. Some of the elements that Mr. Scannell is proposing would not comply with adopted city design standards. That also includes some of the turning movements. Certainly fire apparatus would be most affected by some of that, but there is some utility vehicles that have some of those turning demands as well, needing appropriate driveway access, or you have the risk of breaking up curbs, et cetera. So.
As to the material, there's lots of different approved surfaces that could support the 88,000 pounds. I think throughout the process, we've had lots of people ask about whether pavers or a stamped concrete would be an option. As you notice, there's bollards on either end that would actually not allow normal traffic to go back and forth through those streets or through that access. Is only for utilities or I guess emergency services, I guess. And so,
Mayor Finkel, thank you for that. Sandy, there was a question about the removal of the evergreen tree. I don't know if you can address that.
Sandy Day, Planning Office, I believe that particular tree in the kind of the center portion of the existing park would not be affected. It's possible that fencing could be established around it to try and protect it during construction. I think we would look to our Parks and Recreation staff to confirm both the health of the tree and to help design the appropriate protection plan to protect the tree if it can be protected during construction. I don't know if there's any underground utility work that may affect that tree, and I don't know if Leah can confirm that or not. I don't think there is.
Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. The evergreen tree that is located in the central part of the park, yes, we could take measures to protect that. However, it was discussed within Parks and Rec, certain trees that didn't have the health to withstand construction should be removed for overall project facilitation. But we can, if there is a request to try and protect that specific tree, then we can absolutely facilitate that, as long as it is not within the maintenance perimeter of the tower, or obviously through the path, which if we're referring to the one that I'm thinking of, then it is not. So.
Mayor Finkel, thank you. Steve Scannell, I think this is a question for you. When I look at your drawing and about moving the tower, how many feet from the proposal currently before us and your proposal, is that 2 or 3 feet to the west, or how many feet is that? I can't tell from your drawing.
I think it's moving at roughly 8 or 10 feet from what's shown there. And, and I would just say, well, I have the chance that if you look, the 30-foot dimension that is shown isn't the same. It's apples to oranges. That's 30 feet to their maintenance buffer boundary, which is 15 feet outside the face of the water tower tank above. And I believe that what we discussed at the last meeting and what I'm showing in my drawing as proposed is 37 feet face to face of old tank to new tank. Again, I would just say that this helps reinforce the whole addressing of the key issues of the neighbors, which is to minimize the impact, maintain the maximum green space, and that sort of thing.
Thank you for that, Steve, and thank you for your comments. Okay, other questions or comments?
This is Commissioner Larson. I just would like just to add one more comment, and that is that, you know, I'm not going to support this this site plan because I would like to see some changes on it. And I don't know if any other my commissioners want to do that or not, but that's where I stand at it.
This is Commissioner Ananda. We spent a significant amount of time discussing this in our December meeting. I think that Mayor Finkeldei worked very hard to reach some kind of compromise that would be equally dissatisfactory to everybody, which is a sign of a good compromise. I think that it is what the commission asked for. I am amenable to considering the option of maintaining the tree if that is a possibility. I think that maintaining as much of our greenery is important, particularly as we look toward our environmental plan over the next several years. So that is where I'm sitting at the moment on this.
Mr. Larson, I appreciate that. And I would also like to obviously save any sort of mature growth that we've got anytime we can. But I would add that the sidewalk on the west side being at 10 feet, if it was reduced to 5 feet, then that would provide more green space.
This is Commissioner Ananda. It's my understanding that such a change would require us to scrap what we have and restart this process.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. Yes, it was discussed as a 10-foot, and it was put in the SUP as a condition of the site plan. And to change that from a 10-foot sidewalk, it would have to go back through the whole process.
This is Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. And also, I just want to interject, the city minimum for sidewalk width is actually 6 foot. So a 5 foot sidewalk wouldn't be appropriate for city code typically. So just wanted to add that caveat.
Mayor Finkeldei, Sandy, if we, and Leah made the comment about the size of that, if we didn't touch the current sidewalk, would it have to be enlarged since we're doing a site plan in general, or?
The Sandy Day Planning Office, I believe because of the way the ordinance was set out, in order to have a conclusion that the site plan is compliant with the land use approval of the special use permit, yes, it would have to be 10 feet.
Mayor Finkeldei, thank you for that. I forgot to ask earlier, what do we have other examples of where we've used stamped brick pattern, reddish brown color concrete? I think the reference was maybe in downtown or something. Is that just is that cost factor, or is there any, as Chris King pointed out earlier, is there any durability issues if we wanted to do something like that?
This is Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. Mayor Finkeldei, those are details that we determine in the very final design of the tower in the construction documents. And the team will be reviewing all of Mr. Scannell's comments that he provided both at the December 1st as well as at this meeting to incorporate what we can and definitely review them. Stamped concrete is an option. Permeable pavers for the amount of weight that this apparatus that we're trying to support is not an option that we found. But again, this is something that we would determine in the actual final design construction documents. Right now, we're showing a width and that it will be concrete, but we can absolutely review a more aesthetic, pleasing type of concrete for the construction.
Sandy Day, Planning Office. I believe the crosswalk across 6th Street in front of City Hall is an example of a concrete treatment.
I think that, thank you.
This is Commissioner Hernandez. So it sounds like some of those recommendations made by Mr. Scannell there may be space for continuing that dialogue on some of those elements as we move forward, even if we continue with the ordinance as it's written today. Or is that the only one? Or are there possibly others that could be discussed further as well?
This is Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. Upon initial review of the comments, I think that we can definitely review them all. There are some that, especially as it goes to moving the tower again, that we will not be able to address per the ordinance, but we can definitely review quite a few of them that he's called out in terms of some of the lighting things and the book library, the little book library. But again, those are details that we, put forth in construction documents on final design. So
this is Commissioner Hernandez. So could that be part of our decision this evening, is to direct to have those discussions as the final design is developed? I don't know, Mayor, maybe that's a thought for you or Sherry.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. You can direct staff to have those conversations and do these things. Yes. That would be the purpose of tonight, or part of the purpose of tonight.
Vice Mayor Shipley, Mayor, I'm not sure who to direct this to, but just for having full information, if we did, as Commissioner Larson is advocating, we started over, where in the process, I wondered, does she mean to start over, and what would the cost of something like that be?
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. I can't speak to the cost. Maybe other staff can, but there would have to be a new application filed, and then it would have to go through the process. There would be a hearing before the Planning Commission. They would make a recommendation. It would come back to the City Commission for then ultimately a final decision on an SUP that would be different than the current one. So it would basically be back to ground zero.
Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. In terms of starting over, the contract that we have executed with Black and Veatch thus far, we have spent just over $250,000 on that contract. So it would be in the ballpark of that particular cost, probably, just shy of $200,000, considering that we wouldn't do another basis of design report.
Sandy Day, Planning Office. With regard to processing, we would be looking at a new process, a new special use permit, likely going to Planning Commission for their April Planning Commission meeting. The first opportunity the project would come back before this body would be June the 1st.
Vice Mayor Shipley, I guess I might want to ask Commissioner Larson, being that the objection of the neighborhood is that they didn't get enough public engagement at the beginning of the process, would you feel it necessary to add public engagement that wasn't in the original $250,000 with Black and Beach, or how would you envision that portion of it?
Commissioner Larson here. I guess I would want to understand better if the public engagement would allow changes to the site plan, which it sounds like it would not. Am I correct on that?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. When we talk about public engagement, staff's first and most prominent task is to review a project for compliance with city code. From there, things that were in Mr. Scannell's memo and in the site drawing, things like a play field was one of those elements that I can point to as an example. It's been proposed, and as staff, I have suggested to please not include that particular element at this time. Parks and Recreation staff have indicated that they plan to proceed with a master plan for the park after all of the work in determining the improvements for the tower are completed. Adding a play field as an example into this project at this time may be somewhat premature. I don't know what are all of the improvements that a park master plan may identify for the project. There are a number of things that were identified that are outside the boundary of the property. The little library, for instance, is not within the boundary of the subject property. It doesn't mean we can't have a discussion about that or look at options for that. I think there was a proposal for a dedicated parking space along one of the additional streets. These are, again, examples of things that are outside the context of the very narrow review of the project for compliance with the project. With the city code. Those are certainly all elements that we can work with an applicant. When we start talking about driveway design or public sidewalks along public streets, either not including them or doing narrower widths, those become variants or deviations from the adopted city code. I hope that helps. I'm happy to answer more questions about that.
Commissioner Larson, thank you, Sandy, for that detailed answer. I appreciate that. So what I understand is that anything outside of the code can be discussed for possible change. Anything within the code could not be changed. Is that correct?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. It's not that it can't be changed, is that those deviations come with additional process. So if we're talking about a variance from the street design or from the driveway design, there's a variance process that goes along with that. We would assess it, that alternative design, can it be done in a way that meets other acceptable engineering standards? It may mean that is an approval process to the Planning Commission as they're looking at a special use permit. It may mean a variance to the design standard either by the city engineer or the city commission, or it could mean a variance process to the Board of Zoning Appeals, depending on what that specific item is that we're deviating from. So it's not that it can't be changed. Is that there is a very specific process that goes along with it, and there needs to be good cause, good engineering to support those design changes. So making sure that we have good ADA accessibility. I think there were some questions in some of the design proposals for the driveway that added complications for the ADA accessibility. If we keep in some of those pieces, then we end up with a wider drive. And I'm trying to pull all of that quickly from my memory, so I may have some of that off. I don't know if David Cronin is on the call or not, but he was somebody I was talking to about some of those very specific design aspects.
Commissioner Larson, thank you very much.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. Sandy's correct, but there are also a number of things within the city code that cannot be they're deviated from. They can't have a variance, uses, and some things like that. Typically, the variances are granted for dimensions, certain standards, and then you can perhaps seek a variance to accommodate a certain project. But there are certain things in the city code that a variance will not fix, that you cannot vary because the code is set as law, and a variance cannot be granted for certain things within the city code.
Mr. Larson, thank you very much. So I guess that's what I struggle with is the fact that we're at this point in the process that has significant difficulties for its entire life, specifically in the public engagement part. So we're like at the end of a process, and to make any changes at this point, it just makes it very onerous on the neighbors to get that done, because you're telling us we've almost got to start from the beginning, and which it kind of wears people out. I know it wears me out that we go through this huge long process, numerous meetings, and here we are. It's like we still got some concerns from the neighborhood, and it doesn't seem very easy to try to work those out. And so, again, I'm concerned about that. I hate the idea of starting all the way over on this. I know there's been lots of discussion about it, but I kind of take it as part of our responsibility that it wasn't done correctly from the start, or didn't appear to be done correctly from the start as far as public engagement goes. So, I would still like to see the process, unfortunately, is that it would go back to the very beginning possibly, but I would like to see the process consider more public engagement, is to see whether or not we can get some of those items changed.
This is Commissioner Ananda. I think that I was hearing, and I'm kind of understanding differently, the part of this process that is two separate pieces. One is designing where a water tower goes, which is within a park space. And then there's designing the park, which is a whole separate process that is through Parks and Rec and a master plan that they're developing. Is that an accurate understanding of that?
Commissioner Larson, I realize those are two very separate decisions, and I would never envision that decision would be made at this level, because we do have our Parks Master Plan where that was going to be addressed. I see that as separate. Maybe staff can say it otherwise.
This is Commissioner Ananda. I guess that's what I was hearing, was that Parks and Rec will be discussing this and what the intent is around the park through their master planning process. And so I think that some of those elements to this conversation are somewhat irrelevant.
Commissioner Larson, I would agree with you on the issue with the Parks and Recs. I don't think that's a discussion. That's a discussion for the Parks and Rec. My concern is just some of the other structural issues, such as the 10-foot sidewalk on the south. And I know that's all variance requirements. Now, the sidewalk on the north being 16 feet, if that's a fire safety issue, I would say that would be a necessary thing. I would not want to step in the way of fire safety. But I do think there were some other options that we could look at on some of the other things.
Mayor Finkeldye, maybe state that a slightly different way, or reconcile what Commissioner Larson and Commissioner Ananda are talking about. If I'm understanding correctly, and Randy, correct me if I'm wrong, tonight we're basically directing MSO as the applicant, our applicant, on what they should submit to planning for planning's review sometime here in the near future. Is that correct?
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. That's absolutely correct. That's what you're here today, basically as the landowner directing your developer, which is MSO, perhaps how you maybe want things arranged. Now, it has to follow the city code and has to follow the SUP that was already approved. And those are certain things that are immutable. But other than that, yes, that's what you're here to do, is give direction.
And then, Mayor Finkeldye, the second part of that would be some of the issues brought up by Steve and others in the neighborhood would not have to be decided at the site plan stage. It could be decided in the construction and development stage, again, which we would control as part of the process of MSO. We could involve that.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. Yes, that is absolutely correct.
Okay. Mayor Finkeldye, and then so the couple things I know that are part of the site planning process would be the location of the tower for sure, the sidewalk on the, well, would all, maybe Sandy, correct me, would all the sidewalks have to be on the site plan?
Sandy Day, Planning Office, yes. Public sidewalks would be a site plan element.
Mayor Finkeldye, but as an example, we could direct MSO to work with city staff, planning staff, and the fire department to be as aggressive as possible in decreasing the size of the sidewalk and looking at the entrances. You know, as an example, I'm not making that as a motion, I'm just saying as an example, that's something we could direct MSO, they could work with and come up with a final site plan that gets submitted. Is that correct? Anyone? Randy, is that something we could do? We could direct them to, you know.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. So long as it complies with the code, but yes, you could ask them to be as creative as possible to meet whatever the 16 feet is that's required by the fire code. If it's pavers or some other type of material that would make it look less like a driveway and more like a sidewalk, yes, you could direct MSO to do that.
Mayor Finkeldye, thank you. And then there's some other categories, for example, like the light. Light pole doesn't have to be on the site plan, does it? And that could be on the site plan and not be on the site plan, and that could be addressed later. Is that correct?
Sandy Day, Planning Office. Lighting and a photometric plan is an element of site planning. So most site plans will show the fixture, the general location of the lighting fixture itself, and then a separate photometric plan would be provided that shows us the lighting level and shows us that the proposed lighting from that fixture is compliant with the land development code for those lighting levels as they are adjacent to residential properties or adjacent to public streets. At this time, this project does not have a photometric plan because those lighting fixtures have not been identified until the fixtures and the height and the location of those fixtures are determined. We can't assess a photometric plan. One can't be prepared.
Mayor Finkeldye, I guess my question is is that correct that we don't have to make that decision tonight on the location of the lights? That can be made later in the process.
Lighting, Sandy Day Planning Office, lighting is typically a function that is evaluated at the staff level, but it is a site plan element that is included.
Commissioner Larson, so the proposed light on the west side of the park that was discussed, so is that something that has to be there since it's in the site plan?
Sandy Day Planning Office, the exact location of the fixtures can change. The ordinance says the applicant shall submit to the planning office a revised site plan showing additional lighting along the west side of the property that has a lot of room to determine where that lighting would be, whether it's one fixture, whether it's multiple fixtures, whether it's a 10-foot tall or 20-foot tall, or whether it's a bollard type lighting. There are a lot of different options out there. So there's the way the ordinance was written, the way the condition was added, there is a lot of flexibility to look at lighting.
Commissioner Larson, thank you.
This is Commissioner Nunn. I guess I'm hearing anything that isn't bolted down via SLP or our ordinances has the potential for being rearranged when we move in. And I think that barring starting this process over, that gives us an opportunity to engage some of those specific requests from the neighborhood while continuing this process. And, you know, $200,000 this year goes a long way. That definitely impacts my thoughts on this as well. So I don't know if we're ready for a motion or if there's further discussion to have.
Vice Mayor Shipley, we haven't heard from Commissioner Bowley, and believe it or not, I put quite a bit of weight in what he says, so I'd like that.
Thank you, Commissioner Shipley. I'd like to express my appreciation for the conversation that I've heard. I'm very reluctant to start this project over again. I appreciate Commissioner Ananda's description of everything that's not bolted down can be discussed. I think that is what we need to do, and that's my analysis. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Shipley, thank you. Mayor, going on that, I just wanted to make sure you had asked a specific question of Mr. Scannell, and I think his response was 8 to 10 feet on how much closer the water tower could be to the former site. Are you satisfied with that on this plan if we accept it?
Mayor Finkeldye, I'll answer the question slightly differently, which is understanding where we're at in the process. I'm not sure I'd be willing to start the process over to move it, whatever that is, 8 feet.
Commissioner Larson, as we move on with this item or move forward with this item, the idea of having discussions with the neighborhood on some of the issues that can potentially be impacted by their decisions by staff, what sort of assurance do we have, or how would we know that staff are engaging with the neighborhood on those issues and the final outcome on some of those?
This is Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. Commissioner Larson, I've been, kind of scheming in my own head about participants in terms of, looking at these decisions that we have room to make changes on the final design items, such as the lighting and the stamped concrete. There's a variety of different ways that we can do that. I think that probably the best option is to provide an opportunity for stakeholders to have their input and provide some options at that time at a local stakeholders meeting. And I think we would just call it neighborhood public engagement at that point, and be able to present some options on designs that the city code would support, so that we can again make things more aesthetically pleasing towards the neighborhood and have some like lighting options, concrete options that we can work within the verbiage that we've already put forth. I would, expect that those meetings would happen again via Zoom, because that's the safest way still to meet at this point. I know a lot of the neighborhood there would like in-person meetings, but, we're complying with, COVID regulations and just trying to be as safe as possible. But Also, we can also put things on the website and, have some kind of format where people can comment on it if they can't attend the Zoom meeting. And I'm always more than happy to deliver hard copies to people if that's what they really need. And I've done that in the past in terms of plans regarding this project and others. If for some reason they don't have access, they call me and I pretty much deliver. But that would be my intent in terms of the department interacting with the neighborhood in order to, provide some clarification and some options to see what that final product would look like.
Commissioner Larson, thank you. I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Mayor Finkeldye, the one part of this that does bother me is the 10-foot wide sidewalk on the west side. I think Commissioner Ananda and I worked together to make that motion. I'm not sure if I made it or she made it, and we voted on that. In my mind, we were talking about the north side, and we did say west side. I went back and watched the meeting, so the SUP says exactly what our motion was. But I have this question, and I seem to recall this from the days I was on the Planning Commission. Could we simultaneously move this site plan forward as it works through a process and initiate an amendment to the SUP only on that sidewalk to remove that requirement and process those simultaneously? An amendment to just that one part, not to reopen the whole thing, not to talk about anything else except that. Is that a possibility?
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. Yes, those could be done side by side. I just anticipate that site plan approval will be handled much quicker than 6 months, 7 months down the road, like it would take to run through the SUP process. Then once a new SUP is done, then a new site plan would have to be submitted. So it would be almost equivalent to starting the whole process over again, other than the fact that you would only be talking about the sidewalk.
This is Commissioner Ananda. When we are approving the budget for this, could we just not fund that?
Mr. Larson, I love your creative thinking.
If it's not funded, it can't be built. It's Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney.
Commissioner Ananda, as the property owner, we're in a different role in this situation. It seems like something that would be feasible.
This is Commissioner Bullock. I'm concerned about what kind of precedent that might set, frankly. I think it's a creative but untenable solution.
Commissioner Ananda, admittedly, I had not thought through it, but the back end was the only option, kind of left short of starting over in my mind.
Commissioner Larson, I don't see on the agenda that this isn't actually a motion. It's just to receive it. Am I missing something there?
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. Yes, you're just receiving it and providing direction to staff as the commission sees fit, as the landowner. So.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Finkeldye, Jeff, I saw that you turned your camera on, so that means you're fair game to ask. Can you think of a process that we could simultaneously move this forward and amend that SUP?
Jeff Craig, Planning and Development Services Director. Mayor, I cannot at this point in time because the amending a special use permit would basically restart it all the way back to the beginning. It would also put us into a position where we wouldn't be able to approve a site plan because we wouldn't know what we were approving at the ultimate end of the day. So it does have the effect of a restart in the instance here. And just to, on a best case scenario for a special use permit is typically 3 to 4 months. That is the best case. They can typically run longer than that depending upon a number of factors that would come into it. So just want to put that out there as the best case timeline is about 3 to 4 months, but I would expect possibly longer depending on circumstance.
Mayor Finkelstein, well, that wasn't as helpful as I hoped. No, but it is what it is.
This is Commissioner Ananda. Am I hearing some consensus around, I guess, for lack of better language, the things that aren't bolted down being part of that dialogue with the neighborhood, using the process that Leah mentioned to us in this item?
Mayor Finkelstein, yes, I mean, that's certainly the way I would be leaning. And I guess I would, as part of that motion, since what we're doing is directing staff, would be directing staff to work with the neighbors on all of these issues that we can, and then also direct staff, if Randy and Jeff and Craig and others can think of any way to address that sidewalk on the west, I would certainly hope we put our thinking caps on and come up with a way to make that happen and put that direction in there.
This is Commissioner Bowley. Mayor, with all due respect, I think that would involve a time machine. I think that staff essentially listened to what the motion that passed was and put forward the plan based on what we directed. So I think we need to recognize that staff essentially did what we directed them to do.
Mayor Finkel, I do agree with that. They did. I went back and listened. They did exactly what they've done, exactly what our motion was. So I don't fault them for that.
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. As I've been thinking about this, it is a possibility that the site plan is submitted to the planning department as is based on the city code and the SUP. But it's going to take some amount of time for the construction of the tower and those other improvements to go forward. And then at some point in time, an application for an SUP altering that sidewalk could be put forward, and it would run through the process. Then a new site plan would have to be done showing a change in the sidewalk, but ultimately by the time the construction is done, a new site plan might be in place. So that's just a thought.
Mayor Finkel, I like that thought. I mean, by the time we get to the construction phase, if nothing else changes in the SUP except that one sidewalk, we would never be in violation of the approved site plan because it hadn't been constructed yet. And by the time we got there, the SUP would be amended, we'd approve a new site plan, and we'd build it pursuant to that.
That is a possibility, yes, as I'm sitting here and thinking about it. Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney.
Commissioner Bowley, that's much more tenable than my time machine.
Mayor Finkel, I'd like to...
I concur with that. This is Commissioner Larson.
Mayor Finkel, now I think we're getting closer to a motion that we could work together on. Commissioner Ananda,
This is Commissioner Ananda. I guess I heard that we don't need a motion, that we're just directing staff so long as there's consensus. We don't even have to draft a motion on the fly to address this, but to ask if staff has a good enough understanding of the recommendations that we're making.
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk, and as much as I appreciate that, I think for the record, even if it's not a motion, I don't want to generalize your conversation, I guess, or I think it's clear, even if you all agree and you choose not to do it through a motion, that I'm clear what the direction is to staff.
Commissioner Hernandez, sorry, Mayor. We don't get out of that.
Vice Mayor Shipley, in addition, if we do decide to pursue a new SCP that fixes our sidewalk issue, will we need to motion for that?
Mayor Finkelstein, Randy, do you have?
This is Randy Larkin, Deputy City Attorney. I do agree with Sherry that we probably need a clear statement of direction. I don't necessarily know that we need a motion. You could direct staff to, at some point in time, pursue an SUP regarding that sidewalk without reducing it to a motion. You could also do it in a motion, but we probably do need perhaps a reiteration or a summary of those items that you want staff to do, just for the purposes of the record and for staff.
Mayor Finkelstein, Commissioner Ananda, would you like to try that, or would you like me to?
This is Commissioner Ananda. I will start, and you can hit me in home if we need it. We are directing staff to engage the neighborhood as outlined by Leah in discussions on the items that are not averse to city code or the SUP or any other ordinances or regulations that might be necessary, and potentially move forward as we continue the process to address that the west sidewalk width only through the modification of the SUP process, if that is an option.
Do we have consensus around those comments and any others?
This is Commissioner Bully. I agree with those comments. I guess I would also like to assure public engagement through the Parks and Rec master planning process as well. I don't know if that was included in Commissioner Ananda's comments.
Well, again, it's not a motion, but we have consensus around that as well? And I see Mark Echo shaking his head. And I guess, again, we might have already done this, but I think related to that, and I guess included probably already, but ask staff and planning and fire, as well as MSO, to take as close a look as possible as they can on the width, as well as the entrances on either side. Maybe there's nothing more that can be done. Maybe we've already exhausted that, but I would ask staff to take, as set out in Steve's letter in the neighborhood's concerns, let's at least go ahead and take a really hard look at that again.
I can concur with all of that. This is Commissioner Bowley, sorry.
Mayor Finkelstein, again, I think the direction is pretty clear. Leah, Randy, Sherry, Craig, anyone have any confusion about where we're headed here?
Leah Morris, Treatment Division Manager. I do not at this time. Thank you all very much for all of the dialogue.
Mayor Finkelstein, thank you. To the neighbors who are here, ongoing process, and we will look forward to continuing to work with you, have staff work with you, and in particular, hopefully the SUP eventually that we amend to eliminate the sidewalk on the west side, or reduce it maybe to the 6 foot or whatever is required will not be controversial, but I think that's a process we can work on in conjunction with the rest of this. So thank you again for your comments. Thank you very much for being here, and we will continue this process. And now we're going to take a 10-minute break before we move to item number 3. to get going?
We're ready here, Mayor.
Mayor Fingeldine, welcome back from our break. We'll take roll call. Vice Mayor Shipley,
Here.
Commissioner Nanda,
Here.
Commissioner Lawson,
Here.
Commissioner Willey.
Here.
Mayor Fingeldine is here. We are now moving on to regular agenda item 3, renumbered, and it's consider approving the scoring matrix for priority-based budgeting using the new strategic plan. I assume Danielle is taking the lead? Go ahead.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Mayor. Danielle Bushcutter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. So I am here before you this evening to talk about priority-based budgeting and updating our matrix to align with the new strategic plan. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here, and we'll run through a quick PowerPoint presentation. All right, so I thought it would be a good idea this evening to really kind of start with an overview of priority-based budgeting. As you all know, as we were putting together the 2021 budget, it was really to serve as a placeholder budget. And so we really didn't get into priority-based budgeting in the way that we had in our previous budgeting process for 2020, excuse me. So I wanted to take a bit of a step back. Priority-based budgeting was really one of the priority initiatives that was identified in the city's first strategic plan. The action tonight is to update the scoring matrix to align with the new strategic plan, but I also want to give a brief overview as this still is relatively new for our organization and relatively new for several commissioners. There we go. So I wanted to start first with what is priority-based budgeting, and also talk a little bit about what priority-based budgeting is not. So priority-based budgeting, first and foremost, is really meant to serve as a communication tool. So typically when we talk about the budget, we talk about it in a couple different ways. One is we look at each particular fund, what is an allowed expense under that particular fund, and that's really how we develop our line item budget. Or we look at it from kind of the department perspective and say, what are the various things that each department does? But priority-based budgeting is really a tool to take a bit of a step back and say, what are the goods and services that the city is providing, instead of just focusing at what are the funds, what are the departments that the city has. So it really helps us kind of reframe and refocus our budgeting discussions to really focus on the services that we're providing. It also allows us to be it allows for different prioritization, to look at the different programs that have been identified and really determine how well that program or service aligns with our strategic planning process. So it really helps kind of shape the budget in a different way than what we typically do throughout our normal budgeting process. So what is priority-based budgeting not? It is not a complete budgeting tool. And when I say this, what I mean is not everything is included when we look at priority-based budgeting. We take out things like transfers and things like debt service payments when we're looking at priority-based budgeting, because those really aren't, particularly our debt payments, are not discretionary and are not going to prioritize well when comparing those debt payments to the matrix that we're going to be talking about in a little bit. What it really is intended to do is to focus on our operating budget and to prioritize those elements within our operating budget, similarly to what we have done with our CIP process and the prioritization matrix that we have put together for that. This is a tool where we can do something similar, but on the operating budget side. It is also not a silver bullet. So this is a really good tool to start conversations and to start discussions. but it's not going to tell you what programs we shouldn't be in business to do or any of those things. It will really just be a tool that we can use to start conversations about where are our priorities as a city and how do the things that we do on a regular basis align to our new strategic plan. It's also not going to be perfect. There are probably going to be programs when we come back to you and talk about results and what comes out of this that may not score where you initially thought that they would. Scoring isn't perfect. Identifying the right size of programs isn't perfect. So this is going to continue to evolve over the years as we continue to have discussions with you all about our priorities and about what is the appropriate size of these different programs. We think we've already made some steps forward in that. Initially, when we went through this process in late 2018, early 2019, I think we had over 300 programs, which we quickly determined was far too many. And so we've done quite a bit of consolidation over the last couple of years to get those programs to be a little bit more right-sized. But that will continue to be an evolving process and continue to be something that we look at as we move forward with priority-based budgeting and as conversations evolve over the years. So why are we using priority-based budgeting and going through this process? One is to identify and communicate our budget in a more programmatic manner. That makes it a lot easier to have conversations about priorities instead of trying to do it at that line item level. It also helps us to identify the costs of providing services and link funding decisions to the priorities that have been identified. And finally, it can help identify some efficiencies that we may not have noticed otherwise. So I apologize a little bit for this graphic. I know it's a little bit blurry, but I think it does a good job of kind of talking about priority-based budgeting and generally the process that we will go through in order to bring results back to you. So the process that we go through is to take our line item data and put that into programs that we will ultimately use to identify costs and then go through a scoring process to help determine priorities. That final layer that's titled Program Insights really helps to initiate policy discussions about the potential future for a program. So this is where we can really start to have those conversations about, are there partnership opportunities in our community for one program or another? This is where we can start talking about the current level of service, and is that the appropriate level of service, or do we need to have conversations about improving that level of service or decreasing that level of service? So that program insight level is really where the results come in, where we can really start talking about what are the priorities and where are some opportunities where we can maybe do things a little bit differently than we have in the past. So this is kind of another way to look at it, but I also wanted to kind of demonstrate and talk through a little bit about where we are in this particular process. So step one is identifying the programs and services. So we've been doing this already. We're down to about 100 different programs. And to give some context, some of these include our household hazardous waste program, code enforcement, youth and adult sports programming, just to kind of name a few. Then we will start going through our cost allocation, and we will be doing this using our 2021 adopted budget data so that we can start to get that information about each of these programs and the costs related to those. Once that's done, we'll start going through department scoring, where they will take the matrix that you all approved this evening and score their programs according to that. Then we go through a peer review process before finally in step 5, where we analyze, review, and present that data. So there are 4 levels of priority-based budgeting mastery, if you will. Step 1
level 1 and level 2 are really kind of those base core levels where we start to have that conversation about what is it we do as a city. We can start doing some of the kind of what if scenario planning, and really start talking about some of that low-hanging fruit. So this is really the work that we have been doing to date. And this is part of one of the things that kind of came out of some of these conversations related to this are our internal service funds and services. So this was part of the discussion that happened a couple years ago when we first went through this. And so that was one of the things that kind of came out of those initial discussions as we were going through priority-based budgeting. Levels 3 and 4, I think, are where this gets a little bit more exciting. And that's really where we can start to tie our resources to programs and start to really measure the success of those programs. So it's starting to look a little bit more forward focused, whereas currently we're using priority-based budgeting a little bit more looking back in the rear view mirror to say, how have we been doing? So levels 3 and 4 really start to move us forward and start looking at where are our priorities? How can we measure success for those priorities? And are there opportunities to reallocate resources, whether they be dollars or staff, to help us accomplish and achieve those goals that we have set forth? And then level 4 is really taking it even one step further to really start having those community conversations about are there opportunities to partner for various services and expanding that scope a little bit further than just the city budget to really start having community-wide conversations about what is it we do. So that was a very high-level kind of overview of what priority-based budgeting is and is not. The item before you is actually to update the scoring matrix. So I wanted to talk through a little bit how the scoring actually works related to priority-based budgeting. And so that's what I'm going to cover over these next few slides. So each program that is identified, all those things that we do as a community, are classified into one of two different groups and scored against the same matrix. So the first are community programs. So these are the external things that members of the community know and expect of us, like trash collection and planning. There are also governance programs. So these are related to those internal services that I talked about and are services that one department provides to another. So these are things like accounts payable or citywide staffing training, those sorts of internal functions that have to happen to support those external functions. So the way that this updated matrix has been set forth is to directly align with our strategic plan. So you will see here the 5 outcomes that are included in our strategic plan and the definition related to that. So each of our programs, whether it is a community or governance program, will be scored against each of these different outcome areas. Additionally, they will also be scored against each of the commitment areas. Again, this is taken directly from the strategic plan that we have adopted to really determine how well our programs and services align with the outcomes that we have identified as well as the commitments. This is where it gets a little bit complicated, but each program will be scored against each of those different outcome and commitment areas. The scale is 0 to 4, and we do weight those differently. So the programs will be more heavily weighted towards the outcome score because, again, this is really intended to be a communication tool about our budget so that it's a lot easier to talk about priorities and really have that conversation be about what is it we do as a community. So we do weight the outcome scores higher than those commitment scores. The other thing that is important to note is that once we receive all of those scores, there will be one total final score for each program. And based on that score, the program will be placed into one of 4 quartiles. So quartile 1 will be the programs that are most aligned with our strategic plan, and quartile 4 programs will be those that are least aligned with the strategic plan. This is where conversation can be really helpful, and we can start to have those policy discussions. But one thing that is important to note is that you will always have quartile 1 programs and you will always have quartile 4 programs. And just because something is in a quartile 4 program does not mean that we should no longer do that particular thing. It just means that it's less aligned to the strategic plan. This is really where we have an opportunity for prioritization to occur and to start talking about where we want to best align our resources. Ideally, it's for those quartile 1 and 2 programs, but just recognize because we're dealing with a bell curve, there will always be quartile 1 and quartile 4 programs. So I think that's important to mention and to note kind of at the front end of this is that, you know, as we continue to have these conversations, priority-based budgeting will really help instigate and start some of those conversations, but that will always exist. So the actual item before you tonight is to approve the scoring matrix that we will use for priority-based budgeting. And like I said, that is directly aligned with the strategic plan framework that has been adopted by the City Commission back in October. But I wanted to give a little bit of a high-level overview of the rest of priority-based budgeting. It is still relatively new, and answer any questions that you all may have. So that concludes my presentation, so I will stop sharing, but I would be more than happy to answer any questions.
Mayor Finkeldine, any questions for Danielle?
This is Commissioner Boley. Danielle, I see the applicability of this to governmental funds. How applicable is this to our enterprise funds?
Danielle Bushcutter, Budget and Strategic Initiative Administrator. I think it's still very applicable to those enterprise funds. We will still have to put together a very traditional budget. We have to present a budget to the state of Kansas that is very much in that traditional kind of fund structure. So that will continue. What this does is help talk about some of those priorities. And I think to your point, Commissioner Boley, there is a little bit of conversation that has to happen to say, all right, we're talking about water and sewer. So even though there may be something that is a higher priority in our general fund, we can still kind of reduce that scope to say, this is where all of the water and sewer programs align, and have that conversation about priorities, particularly as it relates to that fund or to solid waste or to stormwater. But to your point, we do have to keep those still in kind of separate buckets, but it's still good to see how that ties to the overall strategic plan.
Commissioner Larson here. I got a question about the environmental sustainability aspect of our priority-based budgeting. I see that environmental sustainability is a commitment and not an outcome, so there would be less weight towards that. Is that correct? Okay. So how is that type of scoring mechanism going to lead us to meet our climate change goals that was set last spring, I believe it was?
This is Danielle Bushcutter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. The nice thing about the weighting is that it can be changed, and it can be changed relatively easily. The way that we structured it is to be in line with what we did way back when in early 2019. We titled them a little bit differently, but the structure was very similar to say, the external facing component is weighted at 75%, and then those internal functions such as sustainability is weighted at 25%. So it's in line with what we have done before, but if there is direction or desire from the commission to change that weighting, that is certainly something that we could do. Even if you wanted to move forward on the actual matrix tonight, we could certainly have additional conversations about the weighting of it as we kind of continue through that process.
Commissioner Larson, thank you. I just don't see anything in the outcomes that has any reference to our sustainability program that we're looking at to implement. So I would be interested in making sure that becomes more of a priority and is actually drives how we develop our priority-based budgeting.
This is City Manager Craig Owens. What we're talking about is really merging two things. And there isn't anything on here that isn't important. What we've committed to is we're going to achieve results. Any of the outcome results, we're going to achieve making sure that we've accounted for all of those 6 different commitment areas. So it's really not saying we're not going to do one of them. It's saying that we must do all of them. There's going to be another piece of your adjustment tools that you have as the policy guiding body is the key performance indicators and setting goals. So we're going to have another set of things that'll come to you in February that'll be these key performance indicators. And once we decide these are the main ways that you're going to we're going to measure success or progress, then you'll be setting goals to what we achieve on those barometers, if you will. So if it's a pretty easy one because you've already established by resolution that you're going to hit this, achieve this by 2030, the 100% renewable energy goal. That's really set the goal already. But if we want to have incremental pieces to say within this next year, within this 3-year period, or this 5-year period, these are the targets that we want to achieve, we'll have to build a budget, regardless of the prioritization outcome scores that we're talking about, that Danielle's talking about here. We're still going to have to build a budget and present a budget to you that hits those marks. So if you want us to throttle up on environmental sustainability as a commitment across the different outcome areas, then you'll be able to guide that. You'll be able to push us to present a budget that does that. Of course, that's going to lead to trade-offs against other things. And if we can afford everything, then of course we do that. But it'll be a way that you can have lots of different dials, if you will, on how we can achieve the variety of goals that we're setting. I hope that makes sense. We are marrying these two systems together. The priority-based budgeting system that you've already been in progress on, and we've already been in progress on here, is helping to kind of bring in the strategic plan priorities that we work so hard on with the community to establish. But I just want to assure you, none of these go away. We're just going to show you how aligned they are through this budgeting system, how much alignment you're getting.
Commissioner Larson, thanks so much, Craig. I appreciate that explanation. So do I understand that this is only one piece of the puzzle regarding how we're going to meet those goals for 2030? Is that my understanding?
City Manager Craig Owens, I'm not sure I understand it.
Well, I'm sorry, Craig. Go ahead.
Well, what I'm telling you is you've got multiple dials to adjust our pace and our prioritization. You're going to have multiple dials. And so if you want to go much faster, then we will present you budgets that take you there faster. If you set out the key performance indicators and set goals to what you want to achieve, we'll build you a plan and present it to you that does that and balances against all the other priorities. So you can throttle up or throttle back depending on what priority you're choosing and how much you can achieve a balance amongst all the priorities. So notwithstanding the weighting factor that we're presenting here, you still will have controls and dials to tell us we want to go faster. So when you set those indicators, we'll go as fast as the community wants, as fast as you tell us to go.
Mr. Larson, thanks, Greg. Appreciate that.
Mayor Finkel, other questions? Before we open it up, Daniel, I'll say that was very helpful to me. I'm still learning about priority-based budgeting, and that was a helpful description for me, and I'm continuing to learn that, so I appreciate that. And Craig, as well as your comments there about how this fits in with the rest of the puzzle. But we will go ahead and open it up for public comment. And if you are a member of the public would like to speak on this item, please use the raise your hand feature, or let Sherry know otherwise.
Chris Flowers, please unmute, state your name. You'll have 3 minutes. Did we lose him? We were muted. Chris Flowers, please unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Chris Flowers, and I was just wondering, like, if we approve this and everything goes on like as planned, will any of this like be printed anywhere so we can see? Like, if it I'm okay with priority-based budgeting, but someone's going to get screwed basically if there's not enough money. And if I was the one getting screwed, I'd like to see like the scores, like how the scoring was done and like what kind of scores the people ahead of me got. So I was just wondering if that's going to be a possibility at all. Thank you.
Karen Pagel Miners, please unmute, state your name, and you have 3 minutes.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Commissioners, my name is Karen Pagel Miners. I have lived in Lawrence for about 27 years. As we look ahead to a future life in our little town, in our state, in our country, and yes, on our planet, we need to examine every individual and every collective action we take, every individual and every collection decision we make, and determine whether they worsen the state of climate disruption we find ourselves in, or do those actions and decisions, even if only in some small way, ameliorate our climate emergency. Not taking the climate crisis into our decision-making into account is not taking our future into account. Please, I urge the Commission to prioritize climate change in all actions and decisions. Thank you.
Chad Osdale, please unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name is Chad Osdale. I'm with MSO. I was wondering where the unrepresented employees rank on the priority budget. Are we going to bother to do the negotiating with people with salary agreements and try to save some money up there, or are we just going to take away our general wage adjustment for the unrepresented employees this year like we did last year and deny us a raise again? I was wondering where the merit pool for the unrepresented employees listed on the priority budget. This is definitely a cost of service. Thank you.
Teresa Wilkie, please unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
My name is Teresa Wilkie. I'm a resident of the city of Lawrence. I question whether climate change is given enough emphasis in the matrix. I attended an input session with planners last year, and climate consideration was the foremost of concern in that group. There are notes on those. On the other hand, the entire matrix is designed to promote sustained economic growth. And I believed sustained economic growth is not possible unless a fiscal decision is made with protection of our climate and our environment at the forefront of every budgetary consideration. So when I wrote my comment to the commissioners, that was my first thought, that every commitment division of the matrix should be written with language that references climate and or environment protection. And that way, if a budget consideration does not score well on what's in environmental sustainability, that would directly impact its overall score relative to other commitments. After getting the presentation and really studying it, now what I think is I would suggest we change the weighting of the matrix. So there's 5 outcomes, they get 75% of the weight. The 6 commitments only get 25%. So environment is one of those commitments, and I would like to see it elevated. Thank you.
Michael Allman, please unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, good evening. I'm Michael Allman, and I'm speaking for the Sustainability Action Network. I trust you read the letter that we sent in, so I won't belabor those points particularly. And I agree with some of the other comments that we're very surprised that climate is not mentioned anywhere in this scoring matrix. Regardless, I mean, if you want to change the weighting, that would be good. But first of all, you need to add climate as part of the matrix. It's not the same as environmental, particularly if you equate sustainability with sustained economic growth. That's not ecological sustainability. So regardless of how you may restructure the scoring matrix, bottom line is what we would like to see is that every agenda item report that comes across your agenda, that in addition to the fiscal impact line, there will be a climate impact line that would have accounting made by staff, data-based accounting of the emissions of whatever you might be deciding to do on that agenda item. You're probably aware that tomorrow we're entering a new era as far as the importance of considering the climate. President Biden has said he's rejoining the Paris Agreement. He's appointed John Kerry as the climate envoy to the world. All of his permitting processes for anything that they approve must pass a climate test. People are taking the climate very seriously and giving it high priority, unlike the past disaster of the 4 years. We would like to see Lawrence looking at climate data much more importantly and giving it a higher priority. This isn't a zero-sum game. It's not that if you give more attention or, quote, money, if you throttle up the climate part of the matrix, you have to throttle back. No, we want climate to be a screen, that everything you do is looked at through that screen, and that would be the climate impact line on your agenda items. Last year, as you probably know, was the hottest year, tied with 2016. There was a record 22 events of disasters costing more than $1 billion. Where is the priority of the climate in this matrix? We're in a drought right now. The drought is, by the U.S. Drought Monitor, projected to persist, and scientists are saying it's going to even get worse in the Midwest. That's going to affect our agriculture and our food. The Sustainability Advisory Board recommended that you declare climate emergency. Where is the priority and the emergency in this matrix?
Michael, can you wind up there in 3 minutes?
Can I wrap it up? Okay. Final note, all the input from the citizenry for the strategic plan is all great. I'm glad you do it. It's an exercise in democracy. But do you really want to set policy by straw poll? Or do you want to set it by science and data The data is very clear. Climate is an emergency. It should be a priority in this matrix. I appreciate if you would give that some consideration. Thank you very much.
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. If there is anyone else who would like to provide comment on this item, please indicate so by raising your hand virtually or physically. I believe that's all the comment, Mayor.
Mayor Finkel, thank you, Sherry, and thanks for the comments. I'll bring it back to the commission for questions or comments.
This is Commissioner Larson. I would like to get a response from staff on Michael's question about how climate change and the climate situation is addressed and making it a priority in this scoring matrix as well as our budget.
This is Danielle Bushcutter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. I'll talk a little bit more about what Craig was alluding to. And I didn't really mention this in the presentation, so I apologize. But the way that we have structured our strategic plan is that the outcomes that have been identified really focus on those external services that we provide to our community. But really, we're doing that work through the lenses of these various commitments so that we don't lose sight of how we do our work when we're moving forward with what we do, which is really reflected in those outcomes. So I think, in reading the environmental sustainability commitment area, it does talk about we consider the environmental consequences of every decision, big and small, knowing that our actions have impacts beyond our boundaries. We protect and restore our ecosystem to make it healthier and more balanced for future generations. So that will be the lens through which these different programs are really scored through. But to Craig's point, when we start talking about the budget and priorities and what we want to move forward, priority-based budgeting will be one of those tools. But one of the other tools that we'll talk about in much greater detail about a month from now are those key performance indicators, which is really how will we measure success related to the strategic plan that we have identified. And so I think that's another opportunity for that prioritization discussion to continue and have that be another avenue for that discussion to say, if your target is here, that may lead to different budgetary decisions or discussions versus if we want to kind of pare that back a little bit. So again, it is incorporated. This will be a part of those conversations, but it is certainly not the end all be all and not the only part of the conversation.
Commissioner Larson, thank you.
Mayor Finkel, thinking this out loud, I guess, I certainly believe that obviously we have a goal and we have climate change is important and we're following that. But as I think this through, when you talk about the 100 programs that are being evaluated, I mean, one could be, I think you mentioned youth sports, right? Well, you don't really grade youth sports on its effect on climate change, right? Or helping the homeless, a program to help the homeless. I mean, the part of this process, as I understand it, is to see whether or not these types of programs align with our strategic plan, which is why I think it's important we keep these. But then as we get into, what do we fund or how we do that? How do we do youth sports? That's a different question. Do we do youth sports in a way that's the most environmentally friendly, whatever that is? Or do we provide services to the homeless? That, I think, is the next step. Beyond that is the how we do it, and that's the commitment of how we do it. But the scoring here is seeing the program types. Danielle, am I thinking that through right, or am I missing something about how this works?
Danielle Bushcutter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. I think you're thinking about it in the right context. Some of these programs are not going to score well against some of the commitments or against some of the outcome areas, and that's okay. That is kind of a natural part of this process. But if there are programs specifically helping to drive us towards a more sustainable environment, then those are going to do that's going to do really well in, again, some categories and maybe not so well in others. So I think you're thinking about it in the right way. And I think this will, again, continue to kind of evolve as we start to get the results of some of that. And you start having some of those conversations to say, you know what, I really thought this program was going to score better. Why didn't it? And we can kind of dig into that a little bit more detail. So I think a little bit of it, it's easier to conceptualize once we have the results as well. But I think your thinking is right in line with what the process will look like moving forward.
Mayor Finkeldye, and I guess maybe to add to that, I mean, for example, the bus service, again, it has its own sales tax, but let's say bus service is a program that we score against this matrix, and it aligns with the strategic plan. Let's say it gets its point total. That doesn't tell us how we should run the buses, whether or not we should have electric buses or if we should have high efficiency buses or not high efficient. That comes later when we are making budget decisions about how we're going to operate that particular system. So that's, I guess, what I'm thinking is the next step after this.
Danielle Bushcoda, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. Yes, and I think the other thing that you would see is if we did have that push, I like the transit example. If we use that as an example and we say, all right, this is something we really want to make sure that we get the most environmentally sound buses that we can, you would likely see that score increase to say, okay, we started with 0 buses that were we had all diesel burning buses. Now we're using all renewable energy. So that sustainability score is going to go up as we continue to make improvements in the sustainability efforts related to that transit operation. So you will still see likely a very small score impact, but I think to your point, as you continue to have those conversations about those impacts, yes, that will likely come in the budget discussions and in the discussions related to the key performance indicators and where we really want to prioritize those as well.
Mayor Finkeldye, thanks for letting me think out loud there. Other comments or questions?
This is Commissioner Ananda. I guess that I look at it as, our commitments are the adaptive problems that we are tackling in a lot of ways, particularly around environmental sustainability or climate change, however we want to phrase that. And I understand that there are folks who think that those are two separate things. Equity and inclusion as well, all of those, the processes, our community engagement, are these adaptive issues that we look at that are very big picture that are going to impact, as far as I can see, how they would score on the outcomes as well. If you have strong, welcoming neighborhoods, if you have an environmentally sustainable budget item or a budget item that increases equity within our community, then they're not only going to score high on equity and inclusion or environmental sustainability, but they would also score higher as a result of that on all of these others. So it's not just one single thing that gets a 25% weight. I see that impacting all of those. And I think I'm hearing that is essentially what that would look like. And for me, I am a knitter, so I can think in terms of analogy to that. There are times when you're looking at a pattern and you're knitting and you're like, what in the heck is happening here? This can't be right. And you have to kind of just trust the pattern. Trust it to work out, and it usually does. Or you can make tweaks that you need to make, but you can always frog it back, for some knitting lingo for you, to fix something that you didn't know was going to be a problem. So I'm really excited about implementing this and trusting this pattern and trusting our staff to, I think they hear us every week and have an idea of what our priorities look like, particularly in equity and sustainability. I think that has been a bell we've been ringing pretty consistently for at least 3 years now, on implementing a matrix like this. So I'm super stoked about the opportunity to get to engage this process.
Mayor Finkel, other comments, questions, motions?
Commissioner Larson, I would just add, I do trust the process that we are putting together. We've been working on it, as Commissioner Ananda said, for several years now, and we always come back to pretty much the same overarching desires of equity, sustainability, climate issues. I mean, that seems to be the big overarching ideas we have had for all these years. And I think staff is building the pattern, so to speak, that we need to use to ensure that we get to the point that we need to be at in order to have a community that that helps address the climate change issue. And I think we are. We've got a resolution in place. We've got all these ideas and all these matrices in place in order to make that work. And I trust that that's happening. Although the language that is being used may not reflect that like maybe some would want, and I can understand that. But I believe we're getting there. I really do.
This is Commissioner Boley. I think we're all continuing to learn about priority-based budgeting. I think we'll be learning about it for many years to come. I think there are various levels of, implementation that we will be looking forward to as we go through the process. And I think, it's one of those things that we weren't able to really utilize as much as possible last year due to the way the budget was. And, I look forward to this year with being able to more fully implement, what the priority-based budgeting. So I'm looking forward to learning more and doing better. So I appreciate the work that's gone into this and support it.
This is Vice Mayor Shipley. I agree, and I especially want to say I'm aware that staff spent just untold hours on this, and so I'm very grateful they've shown us something that we can finally imagine using.
This is Commissioner Ananda, just very quickly. Danielle, I believe that Mr. Flowers mentioned wanting to access that online, and there is a website where we have pretty detailed information. I don't know if we have a link to that through the city page, or can you describe how he might be able to find that information if he was curious?
Absolutely. Danielle Bushcutter, Budget and Strategic Initiatives Administrator. Thank you for asking me. I had it noted that I didn't mention it earlier. We do have we call it our open priority-based budgeting site. So if you go to our budget, our current 2021 budget landing page at the very top, there's a little section there about priority-based budgeting that does have a link to that now dated information about the first time we went through this process, but it does have those programs identified, broken out by the different departments that we have, and then you can click into those different programs to actually get the costs related to those. So we will have something very similar. It also includes the total scores, and we'll put together a full report and have that publicly available as well. That does show what those scores are. So all of that will be publicly available, and hopefully better incorporated into our budget process moving forward as well.
Mayor Finkel, motions, questions, comments?
I would move to approve the scoring matrix for priority-based budgeting.
Vice Mayor Shipley, I second.
Mayor Finkel, there's a motion by Commissioner Ananda, a second by Vice Mayor Shipley. Commissioner Ananda?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Commissioner Boley?
Aye.
Mayor Finkel, aye. Passes 5-0. Danielle, thank you very much, and all the staff for the work on that. Appreciate that. Now we'll move on to commission items. Any commissioners have a future agenda item to add?
This is Commissioner Willey. I'd like to suggest that this commission meet with the 5-member mental health board that's provided in our local agreement. This would be a special meeting, as we have done with the Planning Commission and also the Affordable Housing Advisory Board. The topic for the conversation would be the local agreement. So that's something I'd like to do soon.
Vice Mayor Shipley, I'm sorry, you cut out there for a minute. The topic of discussion would be?
The local agreement that we have.
Commissioner Larson, I know we've had discussions about the various local agreements, and that's something that Craig has been working on with Sarah. And I agree that at some point we've actually got to have a discussion about each one. And I think on this particular one, the mental health agreement, there's very specific things in there that that I think needs to be, I don't know if you'd call it aired out, or at least brought attention to. So I would be in favor of having one directly with the board, similar to what we've done with other boards.
Mayor Finkeldine, Commissioner Willey, I guess the agreements between us and the county commission, and we would be the ones who negotiate that, as I understand it. What would the meeting, the 5 people who are appointed to that board, are you saying we should consult them on what our agreement should be with the county? Is that what the question is?
Well, Mayor, the agreement is actually a 3-part agreement among the city, the county, and Burt Nash. And it provides for a 5-member mental health board, which includes 2 appointees from the city, 2 appointees from the county, and 1 joint appointment. These 5 people serve concurrent terms on the Burt Nash board. But this 5-member board has independent, separate responsibilities that I would like to be discussing with them, as per the agreement. And so, and it has one of the features of this is that the 5-member board is supposed to make funding recommendations to the county commission. So this is in the black and white of the agreement, and that's what I want to talk to them about. And I'm open. This is not a renegotiation of the agreement. It's just to talk about what's in the agreement that is currently in effect.
This is Commissioner Ananda. I wonder if it would be appropriate to have this as an agenda item for the commission in a study session where we discuss that agreement and review that agreement, and then have an agenda for that conversation.
Well, this is Commissioner Willey. I see some urgency to this given the budgetary implications. So, if we can do it like right away, that's one thing. But I don't think it's inappropriate for us to have a meeting with an advisory board that we appoint. And I think we probably ought to be doing it more often.
Thank you, Commissioner Ananda. I guess that I just don't hear consensus for the intent around that meeting, or what that topic of conversation would be.
Well, my concern is that we have an agreement in place that's in black and white. And if this commission doesn't support agreements that we have in black and white, maybe we should have that conversation.
Vice Mayor Shipley, I have been in the past a little concerned about what happens when 1 or 2 commissioners go to an advisory board and try to make direction. I want to make sure that we're being the most appropriate in a space like this. I don't know, Craig or staff has any feeling about that?
Sorry, the unmute button was elusive to me for some reason. City Manager Craig Owens, as Commissioner Willey said, you have had joint meetings. to directly communicate with boards and commissions. You have a number of boards and commissions. So I think if you want to do more of those, that's completely fine. We just need to get it scheduled. As far as enforcement of an agreement, there's a wide variety, as you know, almost as many agreements as we have boards and commissions. So it's kind of following up on those pieces. I'm certainly in review of the variety of agreements that we have, but as far as a joint meeting or trying to receive direction between a board and commission and the city commission, there isn't anything I can advise that's specific.
Vice Mayor Shipley, I heard Commissioner Ananda suggesting doing a study session. Since it's also partially a discussion about contracts, would it be appropriate to have any kind of executive session?
If the question's for me, City Manager Craig Owens, then I would say, yeah, I do believe in city attorneys on the line. I do believe that, outlining parameters for the terms of negotiation of an agreement is permitted to be discussed in executive session, obviously to protect the rights and the negotiating position, if you will, of the citizens and of the city. I think I'm generally stating that correctly. And we have a number of agreements, so.
City Attorney Tony Wheeler, yes, I concur with City Manager Owens.
This is Commissioner Boley. I'm not seeing this as a negotiation of an agreement because, frankly, we have an agreement. It's more, what does this agreement mean? And how will the terms of the agreement be honored? And I appreciate Commissioner Shipley's or Vice Mayor Shipley's concern about commissioners communicating with boards. That's why I'm suggesting that we have a joint meeting in public to talk about the terms of the existing agreement, not to negotiate. So I don't see that as feasible for a executive session, as I understand executive session.
This is Commissioner Ananda. I don't know, and I can say I haven't read that recently, and I can say that honestly. I don't know that we necessarily all agree or have consensus around what those terms imply, or what our expectations are around those terms, particularly if we're considering general practice around the agreements that we have. So I just don't know that I'm ready for a joint discussion on what those terms are and how they're being executed without first having an opportunity to review that for myself before agreeing to a meeting and or as a group together so that we can get consensus about what our expectations are around those terms and then talk to that group about that.
Commissioner Larson, so is that why you're suggesting a work session to go over the terms of the agreement to make sure that all the commissioners are aware of the requirements set forth in?
This is Commissioner Ananda, yes, and that we interpret them at least on a consensus basis as to how they should be happening.
I'm open to that, this Commissioner Boley. I think it's important for us to, I'll just put it this way. We've been talking about renegotiating these agreements for a long time. And until that gets done, I think it's important for us to actually look at the terms of the agreements that we're in and see how closely we're in compliance with them. So I'm happy to study this agreement with you. Thank you.
Mayor Finkelstein, I think that makes sense before we get into a meeting with 5 other people, and then the discussion ends up being between the 5 of us and not the 10 of us, we should probably make sure we know what the 5 of us are going to talk about before we get in there with everyone else. So sounds like we've got a little consensus to move towards that on a future agenda or work session item.
This is Sherry Riedemann, City Clerk. Can you give us a time frame on that, please? When you would like to see that back?
This is Commissioner White. I'd like to see it back next month. Do we have time in the work session next month?
And I don't see the future work session agenda items on the city manager's report. So I guess we don't have anything in future meetings.
We're just completely bored.
I think we do now. Thank you. Commissioner Ball.
Mayor Finkel, I think to discuss an agreement that's in place, I think we should be able to do that next month unless we already have something on there, and we'll talk about that if we do, but I do think that's possible. Other agenda items, I guess work session items or other items, we'll just lump them all together there. Seeing none on that, we would move to the city manager's report. Greg?
City Manager Craig Owens, thank you. There are 2 items on there, 3 items on there, and the one I really want to drive focus to is an update from Citygate Associates on the work that they've been doing. I'll turn it over to Brandon McGuire, I think, on that.
Thanks, Craig. This is Assistant City Manager Brandon McGuire. And actually, I'm going to ask Andrew to give us a quick intro. And we're joined by Stu Gary, lead consultant on the project from Citygate Associates. And he's going to give us some talking points on what we've been working on so far and what's to come. So, Andrew, with that, would you kick us off?
Yes. Good evening, Mayor and Commission. We signed the contract with Citygate in October. And since then, there's been a considerable amount of work that has gone into it. I've outlined that work within the agenda report, and I'm not going to step on Stu's toes, but I will highlight 2 main things. The first one is the public engagement strategy. We are trying to be as responsive as possible to the multiple concerns within our community and make sure that we are reaching a vast and diverse population within Lawrence to make sure that they're heard. The second thing I wanted to bring you all's attention to is the recruitment of Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown is a professor at USC who Stu will kind of take it away on her bio, but she's done extensive work with law enforcement, although she comes from the social work background. And so we're excited to have her on the team and add to what this study will be. 25 internal interviews have been completed since the start of this, and they've been mostly internal. I want to make that clear. And in February, public engagement for this project as well as the website will be up. But for further remarks, I will hand it off to Stu from Citygate. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. Pleasure to be with you again this evening. I also won't repeat the staff report. A couple of highlights. First, I want to compliment your police department. We asked them aggressively for a very large document in electronic data production that contained hundreds of items. We received over a gigabyte. Multiple gigabytes of data that we're going through. They produced that volume of information probably in the fastest pace than any client I've ever worked with. So they just weren't transparent. They were hungry to be as responsive as possible, and I want to pass that appreciation on. We've also been conducting interviewing from the top down, as the staff report outlines, key city and police department executives. We're now moving into executive mid-management interviews and actually analyzing some of the electronic data received. We've also spent considerable time with staff, and we were admittedly slowed in December, both with other staff impacts, including COVID, and the holiday season on the social engagement plan. We've been through several versions of that, Citygate providing the programming and the type of topics that we want to be listening to from the community stakeholders, and staff putting organizations, leaders and individuals' names and contacts to that. We've been categorizing that. I just received today from staff the next draft of the categories and how logistically staff can assist us with inviting and hosting the forums. So we'll be rolling that plan out, socializing it with all of you very shortly. There'll be a web page link from the city webpage to our website to do two things: talk about engagement, also provide a direct email access to us, and ideally a city vented phone number. So if someone can't make a virtual session, wants to leave an email, or due to the digital divide doesn't even have email, wants to leave us a phone call, a voicemail, that input can come directly to Citygate, not filtered through the city by any means. We're probably, by the time we roll out engagement, 3 to 4 weeks longer into the schedule than I wanted to be, but the schedule always assumed that listening would go in parallel with the final deep dive of internal police department listening and the incident data review. So from that prospect, we're on schedule. I just wish socially the listening had started closer to the end of the holiday season, and we didn't quite get there. With that, I'd be pleased to take any questions you might have this evening.
Thank you for that information. This is Commissioner Larson, by the way. I'm sorry. Thank you for that information. You'd indicated that you had brought Dr. Brown on board to work with you on this project. Can you give me an idea of how she will be used as part of the team, whether it will be in interviewing, or has she done any of the interviews that have been conducted? Will she be involved in a public engagement or just review of documents? How are her skills going to be best used?
Absolutely. So first, I'll tell you how and then why we've brought her into the Citygate team. She will do two very, very important things. The first is the team designs listening questions and follow-up survey questions from a social equity and justice and barriers and beliefs construct, ensure that the listening is open and sensitive to unintentional bias. And I believe that takes a trained researcher and demographer in social equity and justice to remind all of us that sometimes we can ask a question but not ask it completely in the most well-rounded way possible. She's also a very trained demographer, as we are, and will assist us with the input of the listening and also the electronic information from the city, and be sure that we're probing for equity and social injustice themes in our research. Third, she will assist with some of the listening sessions. We're still working out exactly whom and how many, but we'll be assisting probably Richard Ward, primarily on my team, who's going to do leading a lot of the external community listening. As to why we retained Dr. Brown, we've frankly been looking before your bid for someone in social justice and equity who is a demographer and researcher and very broadly experienced and didn't have one narrow perspective to quote sell, but somebody that was really had lived their professional life and social equity and justice and could be comfortable with demography and social statistics that we might research, as well as the barriers to listening and working with very different stakeholder groups. And it's frankly taken me a while to find somebody that I felt fit Citygate's ethics of being neutral and data-driven and being all-inclusive without being such a narrow focus that I could only use them in a very narrow way. We're using her on other projects, both police and also on emerging fire and EMS equity and inclusion projects. So that's why we added her to the team, and I will be using her in a targeted sense across those three themes.
Mr. Larson, thank you very much. I did one more question. I noticed that you have conducted quite a few interviews with various leaders in our organization, and in the upcoming public engagement, we'll have a lot of interaction with the community and their concerns or their thoughts on the police department. Are you going to be interviewing actual police officers at some point in time?
Some, not obviously not scoped. It would just be a tremendously expensive undertaking to do all of them. So as we go further down the organization chart, below executive, captain, and above level, we're doing lieutenant, sergeant, team leads, and some officers with special assignments, some officers that are a cross-section representation, but also we're issuing what we call a strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats questionnaire to almost the entire workforce, including non-sworn civilian. So we're going to be asking people in their role in writing to tell us a bit more in depth about not just to their job description, but Lawrence policing in general, what they think some of the weaknesses and opportunities are moving ahead. So we'll be aggregating all that with more focused listening.
Commissioner Larson, thank you very much, Mr. Gary.
You're welcome.
I think other questions or comments? Certainly appreciate the update and the efforts, and it's an important project for us and as we move forward. So we appreciate you bringing that forward.
Well, thank you for the opportunity this evening. It's always a pleasure. The more we work with the Lawrence community, the more we frankly enjoy it. And your staff's done a tremendous job. There's a little over 120 individuals and groups on the engagement list. So when I talk about logistics, scheduling, and programming, individuals, small teams, larger public groups, web-based rollout, we are trying to leave no stone unturned. It's just been logistically a bit of a machine to get up to speed and get running, but run it will. Thank you very much.
Mayor Finkeldine, thank you. And yeah, we typically don't have the shortage of people wanting to be giving their opinion here in Lawrence. So and we're glad for that. We're glad for that. Thank you very much. Other questions? Or Craig, do you have anything to add to either that topic or the rest of your report?
City Manager Craig Owens, I don't have anything to add to that Citygate update. I would like to toss it over to Jeremy Wilmoth for just a minute or two, just to highlight some of the utility billing report. It's got important information in there we want to just run by you.
Thank you for that. Sorry, I'm trying to get something up on my screen to share with you real quick. Can everyone see this report? What I wanted to highlight from our monthly utility billing report is the section that talks about delinquent accounts. On the left-hand side of this blue line is the average ending delinquent balance for fiscal year 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. As you can see, that number varied somewhere between 140 and sorry, it looks like my chart's wrong, but it's less than 500 essentially. Charting the month-end balance for the current or for the fiscal year of 2020, you can see we started out the year, January, February, March, in that normal, if you will, zone. And then since then, we've exponentially grown month over month. As you can see in our final report, currently we have 1,547 customers that owe roughly $634,000, or about $410 per customer. That is currently 91 days past due. Prior to COVID, people that were 91 days past due were put on a shutoff list, and then services were only restored once payment was made. During COVID, we've stopped that process, and as you can see, that 90 plus day delinquency has continued to grow every month. So just wanted to point this out. This information is updated every month in our utility billing report, but you can kind of track over time what's been going on with our delinquencies. I'd be happy to answer any questions you all may have.
Commissioner Larson, I noticed in that we did use some CARES funding to help with some of those bills, but we did not get very many applications to use up all the $500,000 that was given to us for that. Is that correct?
Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director. Yes. The city initially received $500,000 through the CARES Act. By the middle of November, we had only issued a little over 150,000 of that. And so the county reallocated 300,000 of that to leave us with a total of 200,000. And the entire 200,000 was issued by the end of December. As I'm told, the applications really dwindled off right there at the end. So we didn't have a lot of people that applied for money and were turned away. But yes, even after you account for the 200,000 that was infused from the CARES Act, our current 90-day delinquent balance is 634,000, with 1,547 customers impacted by that.
Commissioner Larson, thank you for that information.
I think I have other questions for Jeremy, or?
Yeah, Commissioner Larson, just one more. Do you see any indication that there might be additional care funding, I should say, not necessarily CARES funding, under the various COVID acts that are coming forward in order to help with this situation?
Jeremy Wilmoth, Finance Director. Yes, the last bill that was approved by the federal government, one of the last items they did before the session ended, indicated that money would be going to each state and that the states essentially would decide how those dollars would be distributed. And so we're watching the state of Kansas to see what that process is going to be. And once we know what that process is, if we're eligible, we'll certainly apply for those funds as well. And if we're not eligible, we'll direct people to those resources so that they can apply individually if that's the route the state chooses to take.
Commissioner Larson, thank you.
Mayor Finkel, I'd add, I just following this through other programs. I don't know if it's the Midwest Ethic or what it is, but, there's several programs that are funded through the CARES Act that when people had to apply and ask for the money to pay down their bill, be it with a provider or utility or the landlord, people are just resistant to apply and ask, as opposed to programs where money goes directly to, pay off past due bills. When you don't have to ask for it, they'll gladly accept it. But when you actually have to fill out an application and ask for it, I think there's some resistance to that. And I think we saw that in the utilities, but they saw that in a couple of other programs that didn't spend all their money around town and other places. So we'll see how the next round of CARES funding goes, and how it's directed. Okay, other questions? Or Craig, you have other items on the city manager's report before we open it to public comment?
City Manager Craig Owens, and nothing else.
Okay, this is a public hearing item. We open it up to public comment. If you're interested in speaking, please raise your hand and Sherry will call on you.
Chad Osdale, please unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Was that me you called?
Yes.
Hello. Okay, thank you. I was here to ask a question of Craig Owens. You answered a question I didn't ask last week. You told us that the evaluation scores have no influence on our raises. My question that I asked last week that didn't get answered, excuse me, was the evaluation process that tells us we're scored and evaluated on a score from 0 to 4. I'm told on my evaluation I am scored using the 2 method, evaluated as just effective. I am told other departments are all scored at a different scoring metrics of some kind, presetting the scores before any job performance has been done. I'm just wondering, how can you explain this as ethical and fair? I realize, Craig, that you didn't start this. This has been going on for many years, but you're the city manager now.
Excuse me.
And you get to decide.
This is Commissioner Bowley. Mayor, comments are directed to the commission, please.
He's on the call. I was just addressing everybody on the call. But that's where you sit now as a city commissioner or city manager, and you're the one at the top that gets to decide whether this continues. Excuse me?
Directed towards us, not to anyone else.
Well, I would like somebody to explain how this is fair and ethical when we're told one thing in writing and then turn around. Everybody's scored the same except for you. Your department's scored differently. I'm not discussing any individual score. You said last week we can't do that. I'm discussing the entire department and the entire city. Every employee that's handed this damn employee handbook is told we're evaluated and scored exactly the same. But when the city process goes into effect, nobody's evaluated the same. And the only thing these scores would be good for is evaluating your department heads. You find the department with the lowest average scores, you'll find the biggest failure in the department head. I would be willing to bet I know what department scores the lowest. That's all I can say tonight. I'll have another question about this next week. I'd appreciate an answer, though. Thank you very much.
This is Commissioner Ananda. When public comment is made on the city manager's report or any other agenda item, they should be on items that are on the city manager's report. That item was not on this.
Yes, I've requested for 4 weeks to have this put on the agenda. The city management refuses to put this on the agenda, so this is where I have to discuss it. You will not discuss it anywhere else except in private, and I need this discussed where everyone can hear your excuses.
Thank you. Chad, thank you.
It is not a good excuse that it is just easier for us to do it this way. It is not a good excuse that it doesn't affect your raise. It is still unfair and unethical. And I just like an explanation. That's all. I'm not jumping and bouncing and pissed. I just want an explanation. Please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Nanda, thank you for that reminder that the comments are supposed to be on the report themselves. You know, the public comment section is for general public comment, something not on the agenda. So just a reminder to the remaining 2 speakers that they speak to the items on the agenda. But Sherry, go ahead and announce the next speaker.
Chris Flowers, you have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Chris Flowers, and I was just wondering if City Gates, if they found out what was up with our police chief resigning. Did the police union oust him? I in all seriousness, I think that's a question a lot of Lawrence is wondering, and I hope we get an answer when this is done. And I don't know if this counts, but on the city manager's report, what was left out was an answer to Chad's question. So I hope we get an answer to that also. Thank you.
Michael Allman, please unmute, state your name. You have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Michael Allman. In 2015, a proposal was brought forth to put restrictions on single-use retail plastic bags. A couple of years ago, the Sustainability Advisory Board.
Michael, that was not on the city manager's report.
I'm speaking to item number 3 on the city manager's report. That's what I'm referring to.
Oh, the future agenda item.
Yeah, if I may.
Yes, go ahead. Thank you. I'm with you.
Thank you, though. I appreciate that. So the Sustainability Advisory Board recommended that the City Commission take it up, and the City Commission did. Last August, that ordinance for a fee on the single-use bags was on the future agenda item with a particular date. I don't remember the date. The date came and went, and then the next future agenda item had it for another date. That date came and went. This happened for like 3 or 4 months in a row. And then finally, I think it was in December, it dropped to the very bottom of the future agenda items with no date. So I'm just wondering why this is being kicked down the road. What's going on when the City Commission has expressed interest in doing this? Why does it? I don't understand what's going on. I appreciate if you could maybe explain. Thank you.
I think Sherry, is there anyone else to speak?
You're muted.
Sherry Reederman, City Clerk, and no, there is not.
Thank you. I'll bring it back to the commission. Okay. Any other discussion on that? We move to the calendar items. Any discussion on the calendar items? Seeing none, I guess we'll move to adjourn. Any motion?
So moved.
Commissioner Larson, second.
I have a motion by Commissioner Nanda, second by Commissioner Lawson. Commissioner Nanda?
Aye.
Commissioner Lawson?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Shipley?
Aye.
Commissioner Willey?
Aye.
Mayor Finkel, aye. And thank you very much. We are adjourned, and we'll be back, I guess, in 2 weeks. Okay, thank you.